My name is Meredith. I am 33 years old, and I spent the last 5 years working 4 exhausting jobs just to survive while my own flesh and blood robbed me blind. We were at an upscale Chicago steakhouse celebrating my grandfather Winston's 81st birthday. Between bites of perfectly seared filet mignon, he smiled at me and asked a question that brought the entire table to a dead silence. He asked how that $5,000 a month living stipend was treating me. I nearly choked on my drink. I had never seen a single dime of that money. When I pulled up my bank records right there at the table, my sister Chelsea turned ghost white. I had no idea that the call I would receive later that night would blow the whole scandal wide open. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in our affluent Chicago suburb meant that appearances were everything to my parents. Mitchell and Beatrice built their entire identity around social standing and wealth. Inside our pristine home, love was a currency handed out only to those who fit their perfect narrative. My younger sister Chelsea fit that mold flawlessly. She was 30 years old, but lived like a pampered teenager. She called herself a lifestyle and wellness influencer, a title that essentially meant she posted pictures of herself lounging by expensive pools while wearing clothes paid for by our parents. I was the exact opposite. I had spent my entire adult life trying to build an educational technology startup from the ground up. I wanted to create software that helped underprivileged public schools access advanced learning tools. My parents viewed my ambition as a humiliating hobby. They constantly told their country club friends that I was just finding myself refusing to acknowledge the grueling hours I poured into my company. Because my startup was pre-revenue, I had to fund the development myself. I worked as a night auditor at a budget hotel. I was a barista during the morning rush. I took on freelance data entry clerk positions on my lunch breaks. I even walked dogs in the freezing Chicago winters just to make rent and pay my software developers. I was exhausted to my very bones living on caffeine and sheer willpower. That evening at the steakhouse was a rare break from my punishing schedule. I only attended because it was a milestone birthday for my grandfather Winston. He was the only person in the family who had ever shown me genuine affection. Winston had spent the last 5 years traveling extensively abroad, enjoying his retirement after building a highly successful manufacturing empire. He had always encouraged my intelligence and work ethic. His presence was the only reason I agreed to sit at a table with people who constantly made me feel invisible. The private dining room of the restaurant was dripping with luxury. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the white linen tablecloths and heavy silver cutlery. The waiters poured wine that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. I sat quietly at the far end of the long table wearing a simple black dress I had bought on clearance 3 years ago. I tried to suppress a yawn, having finished a night audit shift just hours earlier. At the center of the table, my parents were putting on their usual performance. My mother, Beatrice, reached over and affectionately patted Chelsea's arm. Her manicured fingers grazed the strap of Chelsea's brand new designer handbag. Beatrice loudly complimented the bag, making sure the extended family members sitting nearby could hear how much it cost. My father, Mitchell, leaned back in his leather chair and boasted about Chelsea's latest social media milestone. He proudly announced that his youngest daughter had just hit 500,000 followers, speaking about it as if she had cured a major disease. Chelsea soaked up the attention with a practiced, radiant smile. She tossed her perfectly styled blonde hair and talked about how exhausting her life was. She complained about the stress of maintaining her wellness brand and the burden of constantly creating content. I took a slow sip of my ice water, biting my tongue to keep from pointing out that taking selfies in luxury resorts was hardly a grueling career. I just wanted to get through the dinner, wish my grandfather a happy birthday, and go back to my cramped apartment to finish coding a new software module. As the main courses were cleared away, Winston leaned forward. He had been quietly observing the family dynamic all evening. His sharp eyes missed nothing. He raised his glass to toast the table, thanking everyone for gathering to celebrate his 80th year. Then, to my absolute surprise, he turned his attention directly to me. His expression softened with genuine warmth. Meredith, my dear, he said, his voice carrying clearly over the ambient noise of the restaurant. You have been awfully quiet down there. Tell me about your educational software. How is the startup coming along? Before I could even open my mouth, my mother intervened. Oh, Winston, you know how Meredith is. Beatrice laughed, a high, nervous sound that always signaled her displeasure. She is still playing around with her computers. We keep telling her she needs to join the real world and get a stable job, but she insists on this little project of hers. It is not a little project, Mom, I said, my voice steady, despite the familiar sting of her dismissal. We are actually entering beta testing with 3 local school districts next month. The software is functioning beautifully. Mitchell scoffed loudly. Beta testing does not pay the bills, Meredith. You are 33 years old. Chelsea here is building a brand empire and you are still struggling to afford a decent haircut. Winston held up a hand, silencing my father instantly. I asked Meredith a question, Mitchell. Let the girl speak. I think her ambition is highly commendable. Building a company from scratch takes incredible grit and determination. My grandfather smiled at me again. I am so proud of you for sticking with it, Meredith. I know how brutal those early startup years can be. That is exactly why I wanted to make sure you had a safety net. So tell me, how is that $5,000 a month living stipend treating you? Has it helped take some of the pressure off while you build the business? The words hung in the air. Time seemed to slow down to an agonizing crawl. I stared at him, my mind struggling to process what he had just said. $5,000 a month. A living stipend. A safety net. The sheer concept of having that much financial support was so alien to my reality that I genuinely thought I had misheard him. I set my glass down on the table. My hand was shaking so badly that the ice clinked loudly against the crystal. Grandpa? I said, my voice dropping to a confused whisper. What stipend? What are you talking about? Winston frowned, his thick gray eyebrows drawing together in concern. The living stipend I set up for you 5 years ago before I left for Europe. I arranged for my wealth management team to distribute $5,000 directly into your account on the 1st of every month. I specifically designated those funds for you so you could focus entirely on your software development without having to worry about rent or groceries. The silence in the private dining room became absolute. The ambient noise of the restaurant outside seemed to fade away completely. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked down at my worn shoes, remembering the brutal winters I had spent walking other people's dogs just to afford heating. I remembered the nights I sat in my freezing apartment wrapped in 3 blankets crying because I had to choose between eating a proper meal and paying my web hosting fees. Grandpa, I have never seen a single dime of that money. I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of shock and rising panic. I have been working 4 jobs for the last 5 years. I am a night auditor at a motel. I pour coffee at dawn. I do freelance data entry. I walk dogs. I am barely surviving. I have never received a monthly check from anyone. Winston sat back in his chair. The warmth in his eyes was instantly replaced by a cold, calculating sharpness. He looked down the length of the table toward my parents and my sister. I turned my gaze to follow his. My mother was gripping her wine glass so tightly her knuckles were white. My father refused to make eye contact with anyone suddenly very interested in his napkin. But it was Chelsea's reaction that truly gave everything away. My beautiful, flawless, perfectly composed younger sister looked like she had just seen a ghost. Her fork slipped from her fingers, clattering loudly against her fine china plate. All the color vanished from her face, leaving her spray tan looking stark and artificial. She shrank back into her leather chair, her eyes wide with undisguised terror. I reached into my cheap purse and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking so much I could barely unlock the screen. I opened my banking app, the one that currently showed a balance of exactly $42.15. I stood up from my chair and walked the length of the table. I placed the phone directly in front of my grandfather. Look at my transaction history! I demanded, my voice growing louder. Look at it. There are no deposits from any wealth management firm. There is nothing but meager paychecks from minimum wage jobs and constant outgoing transfers to cover my business expenses. I am broke, Grandpa. I have been broke for 5 years. Winston did not even look at the phone. He kept his eyes locked on my parents. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see a muscle jumping in his cheek. He slowly reached into his suit jacket and pulled out his own cell phone. He dialed a number and put the call on speakerphone, placing it on the white tablecloth for everyone to hear. A crisp professional voice answered on the second ring. "Good evening, Mr. Winston. How can I assist you tonight?" Arthur Winston said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I need you to pull up the records for the monthly living stipend trust I established for my granddaughter Meredith 5 years ago. I need to know exactly where those funds have been deposited." There was the sound of typing on the other end of the line. The tension in the dining room was suffocating. I could hear Chelsea breathing heavily, quick, shallow gasps of panic. My mother reached out and grabbed my father's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his suit jacket. "I have the records right here, sir," the wealth manager reported through the speaker. "The initial deposits were scheduled for an account ending in 4821. However, we received a notarized change of routing directive just 3 weeks after the trust was activated." Winston's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. "And where were the funds redirected, Arthur?" The voice on the phone was completely detached, oblivious to the family implosion occurring on our end. "The routing directive diverted all $5,000 monthly payments into a corporate holding account. The account belongs to a limited liability company registered in the state of Illinois. The company is named Chelsea Wellness and Lifestyle, LLC." The words dropped into the room like heavy stones. Chelsea Wellness and Lifestyle, LLC, my sister's company. The company that funded her designer clothes, her luxury vacations, and her perfect influencer aesthetic. For 5 entire years, every single drop of the financial security my grandfather had meant for me had been siphoned directly into her pockets. I had been slowly destroying my health, working 4 manual labor jobs, while my sister cashed my checks to buy 500,000 followers online. I stared at Chelsea, the betrayal hitting me with such force I could barely breathe. The dead silence in the private dining room was finally broken by a sound so absurd it made my skin crawl. My mother was laughing. It was that high-pitched grating sound she always used at country club mixers when someone spilled a drink or made a social faux pas. She reached across the table and waved her manicured hand dismissively at the phone still resting on the white tablecloth. "Arthur, thank you, that will be all." My father snapped, quickly leaning forward to end the call before the wealth manager could say another word. Beatrice kept laughing, her eyes darting nervously between Winston and me. "Oh, Winston, you know how these banking errors happen. It is just a massive misunderstanding. Meredith has always been so terrible with accounting. Do you remember when she nearly failed calculus in high school? She is always misplacing funds and losing track of her paperwork. I am sure the bank just got the routing numbers confused when Chelsea set up her business account. We all use the same branch after all." I stared at my mother, completely astounded by her capacity to lie so effortlessly. "A banking error?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. "A bank does not accidentally forge a notarized change of routing directive, Mom. A bank does not accidentally siphon $60,000 a year into a completely different corporate entity." Chelsea finally found her voice, though it was shaking so badly she sounded like a frightened child. "I did not know," she stammered, looking pleadingly at our grandfather. "I swear Grandpa Dad handled all the paperwork for my LLC. He told me it was an early inheritance advance from the family trust. I had no idea it was Meredith's money." Winston turned his furious gaze slowly toward his son. "Mitchell, you had better explain yourself right this second. Did you authorize the theft of your own daughter's trust fund?" My father did not cower. Instead, he straightened his expensive suit jacket and lifted his chin, his face hardening into a mask of pure arrogance. It was the exact same mask he wore when he fired employees or crushed competitors in his logistics business. He looked at his father with absolute defiance, completely devoid of any guilt or shame. "It was not theft, Dad. It was a strategic reallocation of family resources." "A strategic reallocation," I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "You stole $300,000 from me over 5 years. You watched me sell my car to make payroll, You watched me move into a roach-infested studio apartment. You let me work myself to the bone walking dogs in the snow, and you call it a strategic reallocation. Mitchell slammed his hand down on the table, rattling the crystal wine glasses. Yes, I do. Because you were throwing your life away on a pipe dream. Your educational software is a charity case, Meredith. There is no profit margin in public schools. You were going to take my father's generous gift and flush it down the drain, playing savior to unfunded classrooms. Chelsea actually had a viable business model. She needed the seed money for her brand. She had overhead marketing costs and public relations teams to pay. You were just sitting in a basement typing code. You did not need $5,000 a month for that. The sheer audacity of his justification took my breath away. He was not even sorry. He was proud of it. He truly believed that my sister's vanity project was worth more than my basic survival. Beatrice nodded vigorously in agreement, her initial panic replaced by righteous indignation. Your father is right, Meredith. We made an executive decision for the good of the family. We used our power of attorney to make sure the money went where it would actually generate a return. Chelsea's influencer career reflects beautifully on all of us. She is building a network with high society elites. She needs to maintain an image. You have never cared about the family image. You always insisted on being difficult and independent. We knew you would just waste the money, so we put it to better use. We were actually protecting you from your own bad financial decisions. Protecting me, I said, my voice rising as years of suppressed rage finally boiled over. I got pneumonia 2 years ago because I could not afford to run the heater in my apartment. I lay in bed for 10 days coughing up blood because I could not afford the copay for a doctor. And that exact same week, Mom, you bought Chelsea that customized Range Rover. Was that my money? Was my health sacrificed so my sister could drive a luxury SUV to her yoga classes? Chelsea looked down at her lap, refusing to meet my eyes. Beatrice huffed, rolling her eyes as if I were a toddler throwing a tantrum over a broken toy. Oh, stop being so dramatic, Meredith. You had a bad cold. You are fine now. And Chelsea needed reliable transportation for her brand partnerships. You are just jealous, because she has the charisma to succeed and you do not. Building character through hard work is good for you. I turned to Winston, desperate for him to see the absolute monster sitting at his birthday table. But when I looked at my grandfather, my anger instantly turned to pure terror. Winston was clutching his chest. His face had gone completely gray, his lips taking on a terrifying bluish tint. He was struggling to pull air into his lungs, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The shock of the betrayal, the horrifying realization that his own son and daughter-in-law had orchestrated such a callous and calculated theft against their own flesh and blood was simply too much for his 80-year-old heart to bear. "Grandpa," I screamed, lunging forward just as his eyes rolled back in his head. Winston collapsed forward, his head hitting the edge of the mahogany table before he slumped heavily into his chair, completely unresponsive. The private dining room erupted into absolute chaos. I rushed to his side, desperately feeling for a pulse in his neck. It was there, but it was weak and terrifyingly irregular. "Somebody call 911, I yelled, my hands trembling as I tried to loosen his tie to help him breathe. Chelsea screamed and backed away from the table, covering her face with her hands so she would not have to look at what they had caused. Mitchell pulled out his phone, his confident arrogance finally shattering as real panic set in. He barked urgent orders at the emergency dispatcher, pacing frantically back and forth across the expensive carpet. The restaurant staff rushed into the room. A manager with a terrified expression directed the waiters to clear the heavy chairs out of the way to make room for the paramedics. I stayed right beside Winston, holding his cold hand, begging him to hold on, promising him that everything would be okay. Beatrice stood on the opposite side of the table, entirely useless. Instead of checking on her father-in-law, she glared at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated hatred. "Look what you did," she hissed at me, her voice dripping with venom. "If you had just kept your mouth shut, he would be fine. You always ruin everything, Meredith. If he dies tonight, his blood is on your hands." I did not even look at her. I kept my focus entirely on Winston, praying for the sound of sirens. Within minutes, the wail of an ambulance cut through the night air outside the restaurant. Paramedics stormed into the room with a stretcher and heavy medical equipment bags. They forcefully pushed us back to work on him. I stood frozen against the wall watching them cut open his expensive dress shirt and attach defibrillator pads to his chest. The stark reality of the situation washed over me like ice water. My grandfather, the only person who had ever truly supported my dreams, was fighting for his life right in front of me. And it was entirely because my parents had destroyed him with their boundless greed. "We need to transport him immediately," one of the paramedics shouted, signaling the others to lift the stretcher. "It is a massive cardiac event. His pressure is dropping fast." They rushed him out of the room and through the main restaurant, leaving a trail of shocked diners and overturned chairs in their wake. I grabbed my cheap coat and purse, intending to run after them and ride in the ambulance. But as I reached the door of the private dining room, Mitchell stepped directly into my path, physically blocking my exit. His eyes were wild, but his voice was completely cold and calculated. "You listen to me very carefully," he said, pointing a finger directly in my face. "You are not coming to the hospital. You are going to go back to your pathetic little apartment, and you are going to keep your mouth completely shut about this trust fund business. If you breathe a single word of this to anyone, I will use every cent I have left to tie you up in litigation for the rest of your life. I will bury your little software company in legal fees until you are bankrupt. I will make sure you never work in this city again. Do you understand me?" I stared at the man who was supposed to be my father. There was no love in his eyes. There was no remorse for what he had done to me or to his own father. There was only the ruthless calculation of a man trying to protect his stolen wealth and his pristine social image. I did not argue with him. I did not scream or cry. I simply sidestepped him, walking out of the restaurant and into the freezing Chicago night. The ambulance was already disappearing down the street, its red and blue lights reflecting off the snow-covered pavement. I stood on the sidewalk, shivering in my thin coat. They had stolen my money. They had stolen my security. They had prioritized Chelsea's vanity over my literal survival. And now they had potentially killed the only man who loved me. They thought they had won. They thought their threats would silence me, that I would just crawl back into the shadows and accept my role as the family scapegoat. But as I pulled my collar up against the biting wind and began the long walk to the train station, a new feeling replaced the shock and the heartbreak. It was a cold, hard, unshakable resolve. I had survived 5 years of grinding poverty and exhaustion. I had built a company from nothing, using only my own sheer willpower. I was no longer the frightened girl they could bully into submission. They had picked a fight with a woman who had absolutely nothing left to lose, and they had no idea what I was truly capable of. I did not go to my apartment. The L train rumbled beneath my feet, carrying me toward Chicago General Hospital instead of the dilapidated studio I called home. Mitchell had commanded me to disappear, assuming his threats of litigation would break me the way his emotional neglect had broken me when I was a child. He was wrong. The moment the train doors opened, I sprinted down the cold pavement toward the emergency room doors. I was not going to abandon Winston. He was the only family I had left, and I needed to know if he was going to survive the shock his own son had delivered. The hospital smelled of harsh antiseptic and burnt coffee. I navigated the maze of stark white corridors until I reached the cardiac intensive care waiting room. The heavy double doors opened, revealing a scene so perfectly staged it made my stomach turn. Mitchell and Beatrice sat on a plush vinyl sofa surrounded by extended family members who had apparently rushed over from their respective suburbs. My Aunt Vivian and Uncle Robert were there, holding paper cups of coffee and speaking in hushed, somber tones. And right in the center of the room, bathing in the sympathetic gaze of every relative present, was Chelsea. My sister was putting on a masterclass in manipulation. Her mascara was slightly smudged, just enough to look genuinely distressed, but not enough to ruin her flawless complexion. She clutched a crumpled tissue, leaning heavily against Aunt Vivian's shoulder. The moment I stepped into the room, the hushed conversation stopped completely. Every head turned in my direction. Mitchell stood up immediately, his hands curling into fists at his sides. I could see the fury radiating from him, a silent rage that I had dared to disobey his explicit orders. Beatrice narrowed her eyes, her lips pressing together in a thin, tight line. Chelsea let out a loud, theatrical sob and buried her face in her hands. "She is here," she cried, her voice echoing off the sterile walls. "Why is she here after what she did?" Aunt Vivian wrapped her arms protectively around Chelsea, shooting me a look of pure disgust. "Have you not caused enough damage for one night, Meredith?" Vivian asked sharply. I stood frozen near the doorway. I looked at the faces of my aunts and uncles, people I had known my entire life, and realized instantly what had happened during the 30 minutes it took me to arrive. Chelsea had spun a narrative. "I just do not understand why she had to be so vicious," Chelsea whimpered loudly, making sure every word reached the corners of the waiting room. "It was a simple banking error. A stupid administrative glitch with the trust routing numbers. I told her I would fix it tomorrow, but she just started screaming at me. She called me terrible names. She demanded money I do not even have." Beatrice rushed to Chelsea's side, stroking her blonde hair. "Shush now, darling. Try to breathe. You are going to make yourself sick with all this stress." Chelsea looked up, her eyes wide and pleading. "I never wanted Grandpa Winston to hear us arguing." I tried to calm her down, but she was just so jealous. "She has always hated me," she kept yelling until Grandpa collapsed. "It is her fault he is in surgery. It is all her fault." The sheer audacity of her lies was breathtaking. A simple banking error, a glitch. She had taken over $2 million of my money over 5 years, used it to buy luxury cars and fund a fake influencer lifestyle, and she was sitting here crying about a glitch. She was blaming me for the heart attack our father had caused by brazenly defending his own theft. I took a step forward, intending to correct the record. I wanted to scream the truth at the top of my lungs. But Mitchell immediately closed the distance between us. He grabbed my upper arm in a vice grip, his fingers digging painfully into my skin through my thin coat. "You are going to sit down in that corner. Keep your mouth shut and not say a single word to anyone," he whispered directly into my ear, his voice a low, menacing growl. "If you cause a scene here, I will have hospital security drag you out, and I will personally see to it that you are barred from receiving any medical updates about my father." He shoved me roughly toward a hard plastic chair in the darkest corner of the waiting room, farthest away from the rest of the family. I stumbled but caught my balance, sinking into the rigid seat. I realized in that moment that defending myself to my extended family was pointless. Mitchell and Beatrice had spent 3 decades conditioning the entire extended family to view me as the unstable, difficult black sheep. Chelsea was the beautiful, successful influencer. They would never believe the struggling, exhausted night auditor over the glowing golden child. I sat in total isolation for over an hour. Aunts and uncles completely ignored my existence. They brought coffee and sandwiches for Chelsea, Mitchell, and Beatrice, carefully avoiding eye contact with me. I was a pariah, a ghost in my own family. Eventually, Beatrice stood up from the sofa. She smoothed down her designer skirt, offered a tight, reassuring smile to Aunt Vivian, and walked purposefully over to my dark corner. She did not sit down next to me. She stood over me, arms crossed, projecting an air of absolute superiority. "I hope you are satisfied, Meredith," Beatrice said softly, her voice barely carrying over the hum of the vending machines. Her tone was completely conversational, masking the venom in her words, so the relatives across the room would think we were simply having a quiet mother and daughter moment. "Satisfied," I replied, looking up at her cold eyes. "You stole my future, Mom. You let me starve. You let me freeze. And you are standing here asking if I am satisfied." Beatrice let out a harsh, bitter breath. "You have always been jealous of Chelsea's charisma. Since you were a little girl, you could not stand that people naturally gravitated toward her. You could not stand that she was brighter, prettier, and more engaging than you. We redirected the funds because we knew you would just waste it on your failing software. We were protecting the family assets from your incompetence." "My incompetence?" I asked, my voice shaking with restrained fury. "I built a technology company from nothing. I learned to code while working midnight shifts. I survived everything you threw at me. Chelsea does not even know how to file her own taxes. You handed her my millions on a silver platter because she fits your shallow, pathetic country club aesthetic. Beatrice leaned closer, her eyes flashing with malice. Chelsea has a brand. Chelsea has a future. What do you have, Meredith? A cheap coat and a delusional complex. You think you are some brilliant entrepreneur, but you are just a bitter, exhausted girl typing code in a basement. You have no connections. You have no charm. The money would have been completely squandered on you. Chelsea actually utilized it to elevate the family name. I stared at my mother, completely disgusted by her warped reality. You committed federal wire fraud, I reminded her quietly. You and Dad forged a power of attorney. You stole from Winston's trust. That is not elevating the family name. That is a felony. Beatrice smiled a sharp, razor-thin smile. Who is going to believe you? Look around this room. Look at how everyone sees you. You are the unstable daughter who caused her grandfather's heart attack over a temper tantrum. We are respected members of this community. Your father runs a major logistics firm. I sit on the board of 3 local charities. If you try to make wild accusations about wire fraud, we will simply tell the authorities that your business failed and you had a mental breakdown. We will say you are trying to extort us. She paused, letting the threat hang heavy in the sterile hospital air. Winston is an old man, Beatrice continued callously. Even if he survives this surgery, he will be frail. He will need care. He will need us to manage his affairs. By tomorrow morning, your father and I will have full medical and legal control over his estate. Your little trust fund will be permanently dissolved. You will get absolutely nothing. So I suggest you walk out of those double doors, go back to your miserable life, and pretend none of this ever happened. It is the only way you survive this. Before I could respond, the heavy doors to the surgical wing swung open. A surgeon in blue scrubs walked into the waiting room, his face masked with exhaustion. The entire family instantly stood up, swarming him like bees. Chelsea pushed her way to the front, grabbing the doctor's arm with tears streaming down her face. "Please tell me my grandfather is okay," she begged, her voice trembling perfectly. "I love him so much." I stood up from my chair but remained in my corner watching the spectacle. The surgeon offered a tight professional nod. "Mr. Winston survived the operation," the doctor announced. "It was a massive myocardial infarction, but we managed to stabilize his heart. He is currently in a medically induced coma to allow his body to recover from the trauma. The next 48 hours are highly critical. We will not know the full extent of the damage until we slowly wake him up." A collective sigh of relief washed over the waiting room. Mitchell pulled Beatrice into a hug, while Chelsea buried her face in Aunt Vivian's chest, sobbing loudly about how thankful she was. They were celebrating, but I knew exactly what they were really celebrating. They were celebrating the fact that Winston was unconscious. As long as he was in a coma, he could not tell anyone about the stolen money. He could not change his will. He could not press charges. Mitchell and Beatrice had just been handed the exact window of time they needed to solidify their control over his massive estate and bury their crimes forever. The doctor turned to Mitchell. "Are you the medical proxy?" "Yes, I am his son," Mitchell said quickly, stepping forward with an air of absolute authority. "I hold his power of attorney. Whatever decisions need to be made, you come directly to me." I watched my father effortlessly lay the groundwork for his final takeover. He was going to use Winston's vulnerable state to lock me out forever. He was going to ensure I never saw my grandfather again. Beatrice turned her head slightly, catching my eye from across the room. She gave me a slow, victorious smirk. The message was crystal clear. They had won. They had the power, the money, and the family's complete support. I was entirely alone. I did not break her gaze. I did not cry. I simply turned around and walked out of the cardiac waiting room, pushing through the heavy double doors and stepping back into the harsh fluorescent light of the main hospital corridor. They thought my silence was submission. They thought my departure meant I was defeated. They truly believed I was just a tired, broke girl with no resources and no fight left in me. They had vastly underestimated the very resilience they forced me to build. I walked out of the hospital with a singular burning focus. I was not going to let them win. I was going to tear their fake empire down to the studs. The freezing wind bit through my thin coat as I walked the final 6 blocks from the train station to my apartment building. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long, distorted shadows on the cracked pavement. My studio apartment was on the 4th floor of a dilapidated walk-up with a broken radiator and windows that rattled whenever a heavy truck drove past. When I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the temperature was barely above 50 degrees. I did not turn on the main overhead light. I simply walked over to my cramped desk, powered up my laptop, and sat in the glow of the monitor. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a message from my father. I opened it, the harsh blue light of the screen illuminating his calculated cruelty. The text read, "Do not test me, Meredith. If you make a public fuss about tonight, I will crush you. You have 0 capital and 0 influence. I will drag you into court, bury you in legal fees, and bleed you dry. I know all about your pathetic little educational software startup. I will personally contact your potential investors, your school district clients, and anyone else who listens. I will tell them you are mentally unstable and financially insolvent. Your business will be homeless and bankrupt by the end of the month. Stay away from the hospital and keep your mouth shut." I stared at the message for a long time. He was banking on my fear. He assumed that because I was poor, I was completely powerless. I set the phone face down and pulled up my software code. I needed to work. I needed to focus on the one thing they could not take away from me. But the code blurred on the screen. The adrenaline from the hospital confrontation was wearing off, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion that made my hands shake. I glanced at the digital clock in the corner of my computer screen. 2 o'clock in the morning. Then my phone rang. It was not a text message this time. It was an incoming call from an unknown number. I hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. "Hello?" I said, my voice hoarse in the quiet, freezing apartment. "Meredith. This is Richard Donovan. I am your grandfather Winston's estate attorney and primary legal counsel. We met briefly at a family function about 10 years ago." Donovan's voice was crisp, alert, and entirely devoid of the panicked chaos that had consumed my family at the hospital. I sat up straighter, my exhaustion instantly vanishing. "Is my grandfather okay? Has something happened?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. "Winston is still in the medically induced coma," Donovan replied smoothly. "The hospital staff informed me of his condition 20 minutes after he arrived. But that is not why I am calling you at 2 in the morning. I received a highly disturbing phone call from Arthur Winston's wealth manager shortly after the ambulance took your grandfather away." Arthur was quite shaken. He informed me about the routing directive confrontation at the restaurant regarding your $5,000 monthly stipend. I immediately accessed the secure server holding your grandfather's trust documents to verify Arthur's claims. Donovan took a sharp breath, and I could hear the rustle of heavy paper on his end of the line. "Meredith, the $5,000 a month was just a living stipend. It was meant to cover your basic necessities while you built your business. But it was just the tip of the iceberg. Your grandfather did not just set up a monthly allowance. 5 years ago, anticipating that your startup would eventually require massive scaling capital, Winston established a primary trust fund in your name. It was programmed to activate entirely on your 30th birthday. The principal amount was $4 million. $4 million. The number slammed into my chest with the force of a freight train. $4 million. On my 30th birthday, I had been working a double shift at a local coffee shop. I had celebrated by buying a day-old muffin and crying in the break room because my electricity had been shut off. I had $4 million sitting in a trust, and I was freezing in the dark. "I do not understand," I whispered, my throat completely dry. "How could I have a $4 million trust and never know about it? How could I never receive a single bank statement or legal notice? Because your father intercepted everything," Donovan stated, his voice turning ice-cold with professional fury. "Mitchell and Beatrice did not just divert your monthly stipend, Meredith. They completely hijacked the primary trust. When I reviewed the file tonight, I discovered a comprehensive power of attorney document. It bears your signature, granting your father total administrative and financial control over all your assets. They use that forged document to lock you out of the communications loop and authorize massive withdrawals. I never signed a power of attorney, I said fiercely. I have not signed a legal document with my father since I was 18 years old. I know you did not. Donovan agreed. The signature is a highly sophisticated forgery. They likely lifted it from an old tax return or college loan application. But with that fake authorization, Mitchell and Beatrice bypassed the standard security protocols. Over the last 3 years, they have systematically siphoned over $2.5 million out of your principal trust. Where did the money go? I asked, feeling a sickening wave of nausea wash over me. $2.5 million is an astronomical amount of cash. How did they spend it so quickly? Donovan sighed a heavy, tired sound. Mitchell's logistics firm has been failing for years. The industry shifted, he made terrible investments, and the company took on massive debt. He has been hiding his insolvency from his country club friends and his corporate board. He used $1.5 million of your money to quietly pay off his creditors and artificially inflate his quarterly earnings reports. He literally stole your future to save his own fragile ego. And the rest of it, I demanded, my fingernails digging into my palms. The remaining $1 million went directly to funding Chelsea's lavish lifestyle, Donovan explained in a tone of absolute disgust. The designer clothes, the first-class flights to Bali and Paris, the luxury vehicles. Chelsea's entire influencer brand is a complete fabrication built on your stolen inheritance. Your parents bought her a fake empire using your money so they could maintain the illusion of having a perfect, successful golden child. I stood up from my desk and began pacing the narrow floor of my apartment. The sheer scale of their betrayal was almost incomprehensible. They had not just allowed me to struggle, they had actively, methodically robbed me to finance their own vanity. My father was currently threatening to destroy my business with money that he had stolen directly from my own bank account. Mitchell just texted me, I told Donovan, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. He threatened to bury me in legal fees and destroy my startup if I make a public fuss. He thinks he holds all the cards because he has money, and I do not. He holds nothing, Donovan countered sharply. Mitchell is currently at the hospital attempting to assert his status as Winston's medical proxy. He thinks that if he controls Winston's medical decisions, he can permanently block me from accessing the estate. He is trying to run out the clock and solidify his theft before your grandfather wakes up, but Mitchell made one critical miscalculation. What is that? I asked, stopping my pacing. He forgot that Winston gave me an overriding legal directive 5 years ago. Donovan said, his voice ringing with fierce loyalty to my grandfather. Winston authorized me to trigger an immediate asset freeze on all family accounts if I ever suspected financial foul play. But I need concrete proof to take to the federal authorities. The bank records I have only show the transfers from the trust to Mitchell's shell companies. I need the digital footprint. I need the internet protocol addresses, the wire transfer receipts, the offshore routing numbers. I need irrefutable proof that Mitchell and Chelsea moved that money across state lines to commit federal wire fraud. I looked at my computer screen. The lines of complex software code were still glowing in the dark room. My parents thought my educational tech startup was a joke. They thought I was just a bitter girl typing uselessly in a basement. They had entirely overlooked the fact that I was a highly skilled systems architect who understood data routing and digital security systems better than anyone they had ever hired. I can get you that proof, Donovan, I said smoothly. I can trace every single digital breadcrumb they left behind. I can track every wire transfer and match it to their specific devices. How much time do we have before Mitchell locks down the estate? 48 hours, Donovan replied. We have exactly 48 hours before Mitchell's lawyers petition a judge for emergency conservatorship over Winston's assets. If he gets that conservatorship, he will wipe the servers clean and dissolve your trust entirely. He is not going to get the chance I promised, cracking my knuckles and sitting back down at my desk. Send me the encrypted files and the trust account access logs. I will tear their financial history apart piece by piece. They wanted to steal my life to fund their fake empire. Now I am going to use my skills to burn their empire to the ground. The encrypted files from Donovan arrived in my secure inbox exactly 12 minutes after our phone call ended. I downloaded the massive data packets, my fingers flying across the keyboard. There were thousands of pages of PDF documents, scanned bank statements, and redacted ledger entries. To a normal person, it was an impenetrable fortress of financial jargon designed to bore auditors into giving up. To a systems architect, it was simply a poorly constructed database begging to be reverse engineered. I did not bother reading the documents manually. That would take weeks I did not have. Instead, I opened my code editor and began writing a custom script utilizing optical character recognition to scan the heavily redacted files. I needed to extract every single routing number, timestamp, and account variable, then map them onto a visual timeline using a data visualization tool I had originally built for my own startup. My apartment was freezing, the broken radiator clanking uselessly in the corner. I was wearing 2 heavy sweaters and fingerless gloves just to keep my joints from stiffening, but I did not feel the cold. My mind was running at 1,000 miles an hour. I was fueled by pure, unadulterated adrenaline and the bitter taste of vindication. The sun slowly rose over the Chicago skyline, casting a pale gray light through my rattling window, but I never once stepped away from the monitor. Mitchell thought he was a criminal mastermind. He had routed the stolen trust funds through a labyrinth of shell companies registered in Delaware and Nevada, attempting to wash the money before it hit Chelsea's accounts. But my father was a logistics manager, not a cybersecurity expert. He made the amateur mistake of accessing those offshore accounts using his home internet network. I wrote a secondary script to cross-reference the login metadata Donovan had provided against public internet protocol registries. Within 6 hours, the algorithm had isolated the exact digital footprint. Every single unauthorized transfer out of my trust fund had been initiated from the IP address registered to my parents' sprawling suburban mansion. Furthermore, the receiving accounts were logged into daily from the IP address assigned to Chelsea's luxury downtown condo. They had not just moved money between local banks. To hide the larger withdrawals, Mitchell had utilized interstate wire transfers, bouncing the funds across state lines before bringing them back to Illinois. I documented each transaction, capturing the exact routing data and server logs. By moving the stolen money across state borders, my father had elevated his crime from simple theft to federal wire fraud. He had handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy him. By the second night, my eyes were burning and my hands were cramping, but the parsing algorithm was complete. I had a perfect chronological spreadsheet of every dollar they had stolen from my grandfather's trust over the past 5 years. But looking at raw numbers on a screen was not enough. I needed to understand the human cost. I opened my personal diary application and my business expense ledgers. I began a side-by-side comparison, mapping the exact dates of their massive withdrawals against the timeline of my own life. What I discovered next made me physically sick to my stomach. I scrolled back to December 2 years ago. I remembered that month with vivid, terrifying clarity. My educational software startup had run out of runway. I had drained my meager savings to keep the servers online, leaving me with exactly $14 to my name. My landlord had shut off the heating in my apartment due to a dispute over unpaid utility bills. I remembered shivering under a pile of thin, ragged blankets, wearing 2 winter coats and a beanie indoors just to keep my teeth from chattering. I remembered the deep, rattling cough that had settled in my chest, eventually turning into a severe, agonizing case of pneumonia. I remembered coughing up bright red blood into a cheap paper towel, terrified and sobbing because I could not afford to go to the hospital. I had no health insurance, no safety net, and nobody to call. I had nearly died on a mattress on the floor in this very room. I looked at the stolen trust ledger for that exact same week. On December 12th, while I was literally fighting for my breath in a freezing room, a withdrawal of $95,000 was pulled from my primary trust fund. I traced the routing number. The money was wired directly to a luxury foreign auto dealership in downtown Chicago. I immediately opened a new browser tab and pulled up Chelsea's public social media profile, scrolling back 2 years. There it was. A photo posted on December 14th. Chelsea was standing in front of a customized brand new white Range Rover holding a massive red bow. Her caption read, "Early Christmas present to myself. Hard work pays off." I stared at the photo, feeling a wave of nausea wash over me. She had bought a luxury vehicle using the exact funds that were meant to keep me warm and safe. She was driving my stolen security while I was coughing up blood. I forced myself to keep scrolling through the timeline, bracing for the next blow. I moved to August just 8 months ago. That was the week my lead software developer threatened to quit because I was 2 weeks late on payroll. I was desperate to keep the project alive. I had driven my beat-up rusting 2008 Honda Civic to a shady used car lot on the outskirts of the city and sold it for $4,000 cash. I remembered handing over the keys and then facing the humiliating 2-hour walk home in the pouring rain, because I could not even justify spending money on a bus ticket. I had arrived at my apartment soaking wet, shivering, and completely exhausted, but deeply relieved that my developers would not go hungry. I cross-referenced that exact week on the trust ledger. On August 9th, my father authorized a wire transfer of $50,000 out of my primary account. I tracked the recipient routing information. The funds were deposited directly into the corporate accounts of the Oak Brook Elite Country Club. It was my mother's exclusive social club. I pulled up my mother's social media. A post from August 10th showed Beatrice clinking crystal champagne flutes with her wealthy friends on a manicured golf course. The caption boasted about her new premium platinum tier membership upgrade. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating the tears of pure rage streaming down my face. This was not a passive crime. This was not a simple administrative oversight. This was a calculated, malicious destruction of my life. Every time I had suffered, they had leveled up their luxury. My starvation funded their steak dinners. My freezing nights paid for their heated leather seats. My desperation bought their social status. They had built their entire glittering, flawless reputation on the foundation of my absolute misery. The 48 hours passed in a blur of relentless, obsessive focus. I did not sleep. I barely drank water. By the time the sun rose on the third morning, my digital dragnet was perfectly complete. I had compiled over 400 pages of irrefutable, hard-coded forensic evidence. I had mapped the IP addresses, the wire routing numbers, the shell company registrations, and the offshore holding accounts. I had linked every stolen dollar directly to the lavish purchases my family had proudly documented on their public platforms. There were no loopholes left. There was no banking error excuse that could possibly explain away this mountain of federal crimes. I bundled the evidence into a highly encrypted digital vault. I attached a detailed executive summary cross-referencing the federal statutes for wire fraud, tax evasion, and grand larceny. I sent the entire package to Donovan via a secure, untraceable server link. I did not include a long, emotional message. I simply typed, "Here is the weapon. Load the gun. I will pull the trigger." I closed my laptop and finally stood up. My body was screaming for sleep, aching from sitting in the cold for 2 solid days. But my mind was sharper and clearer than it had ever been in my entire life. I walked over to the broken, cracked mirror hanging on my closet door and looked at my reflection. The dark circles under my eyes were heavy and my skin was pale from lack of sunlight. I looked exactly like the broken, struggling girl my parents believed me to be. But the victim they had created was officially dead. I was holding the matches and they were standing in a house made of paper. All I needed to do now was make them feel completely safe, perfectly secure in their arrogance right before I burned it all to the ground. I picked up my phone from the cluttered desk. The screen was cracked in the top left corner, a physical reminder of the time I had dropped it while rushing to my third job in the freezing rain. I opened the family group chat. It had been silent since the dinner, a digital void where my parents and sister were likely waiting for me to crack under the pressure of my father's threats. They expected me to beg, to grovel, to plead for a scrap of mercy. I was going to give them exactly what they wanted, wrapped in the most perfectly crafted lie I had ever told. I needed to construct a message that tasted of absolute defeat. It had to be pathetic enough to stroke their massive egos and convince them that I was fully broken. I took a deep breath, channeled every ounce of the scared, exhausted girl they believed me to be, and began to type, "Mom, Dad, Chelsea." I am so sorry for my outburst at the restaurant last night. I was completely out of line. I have been under an immense amount of stress with my software company failing and working so many late-night shifts to pay rent. I let my exhaustion and my emotions get the better of me. I misunderstood the situation with the trust fund and I overreacted. I know you were just trying to protect the family assets from my bad business decisions. I do not want any legal trouble, Dad. I do not want to fight. Please do not ruin my startup. I am dropping the entire issue. I hope you can find it in your hearts to forgive me for ruining Grandpa's birthday dinner. I am so sorry. My stomach churned as I hit send. It felt repulsive to type those words to validate their horrifying abuse and take the blame for the heart attack they had caused. But this was chess, and I was sacrificing a pawn to trap the king. I set the phone down and watched the screen waiting for the bait to be taken. It did not take long. Within 3 minutes, the typing bubbles appeared. My father was the first to reply. His response was swift, authoritative, and dripping with the arrogant condescension of a man who believed he had successfully terrified his target into submission. "I am glad you have finally come to your senses," Meredith Mitchell wrote. "Your behavior at the restaurant was disgraceful. We are willing to overlook this temporary lapse in your mental stability, provided you keep your promise and drop these ridiculous delusions about the trust fund. Focus on your little coding hobby and stay out of family financial matters. We will handle Winston's medical proxy from here. Do not visit the hospital." I took a screenshot of the message. He had just formally documented his intention to bar me from seeing my grandfather while acknowledging his control over the stolen funds. It was a beautiful piece of evidence. A moment later, Beatrice chimed in. Her text was laced with the passive-aggressive venom she had perfected over 3 decades. "We only ever wanted what was best for the family, Meredith. It is exhausting always having to protect you from yourself. Your father and I are under a tremendous amount of stress dealing with Winston's health right now. Please do not cause any more drama. We simply do not have the energy to deal with your outbursts." I captured that screenshot as well, but I was waiting for the final piece of the puzzle. I was waiting for the golden child to claim her victory. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I could imagine Chelsea sitting in her luxury condo typing and retyping her response, trying to find the exact combination of words that would make her sound magnanimous while simultaneously stepping on my throat. Finally, her message came through. It was a masterclass in narcissistic delusion. Apology accepted. Chelsea wrote, "I was deeply hurt by your jealousy and the terrible accusations you made against my brand. I have worked very hard for my lifestyle, and it was incredibly toxic of you to try and take credit for my success. But I believe in wellness and positive energy, so I am choosing to let go of your negativity. We forgive you. Just focus on getting the mental help you clearly need. Apology accepted. We forgive you." I stared at those specific words for a long time. I did not feel angry anymore. I felt an overwhelming icy calm. I took the final screenshot, backed up the entire chat log to my secure cloud server, and forwarded the transcript directly to Donovan. They had taken the bait hook, line, and sinker. They felt completely secure. They believed I was neutralized, intimidated by their wealth, and too cowardly to fight back. They were going to let their guard down, and that was exactly when the trap would snap shut. My phone rang almost immediately. It was Donovan. He had received my massive forensic data packet hours ago, and now he had the text messages confirming their false sense of security. Meredith, Donovan said, his voice completely devoid of its usual formal restraint. "I have been an estate attorney for 40 years. I have dealt with greedy relatives, embezzlers, and corporate thieves. I have never in my entire career seen a digital forensic audit as comprehensive, devastating, and flawlessly executed as the one you just sent me." "I told you I could trace the digital breadcrumbs," I replied, leaning back in my desk chair. "Did I give you enough ammunition to stop my father from taking over the estate?" "You gave me a nuclear warhead," Donovan stated flatly. "Mitchell's plan to secure emergency conservatorship over Winston's assets relies entirely on him presenting himself to a judge as an upstanding, fiscally responsible son. He plans to argue that Winston is incapacitated and that he is the only logical choice to manage the accounts. But the timeline you mapped out proves that Mitchell and Beatrice used a forged power of attorney to execute interstate wire transfers. They funneled over $2.5 million out of your trust. This is no longer a civil dispute over a family inheritance, Meredith. This is federal wire fraud. What is our next move? I asked, the exhaustion in my body entirely masked by the sharp focus in my mind. While they are busy celebrating your submission and patting themselves on the back, I am quietly filing federal injunctions under seal. Donovan explained. A federal judge is going to review this forensic packet this afternoon. Because the evidence of flight risk and asset dissipation is so overwhelming, the judge will issue an immediate covert freeze on every single account linked to Mitchell Beatrice and Chelsea Wellness and Lifestyle LLC. So they will not have access to the stolen money, I asked. They will not have access to any money, Donovan corrected. The beauty of a federal injunction under seal is that the bank does not notify the account holder when the freeze is applied. They will not know they are locked out until they actually try to swipe their credit cards or authorize a transfer. But that is not even the best part. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk. Tell me. Because of the sheer volume of the stolen funds, this automatically triggers the Internal Revenue Service. Donovan said, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice. Mitchell moved $1.5 million into his failing logistics company to pay off corporate debt. But he did not report that massive influx of cash as taxable income because he could not legally explain where it came from. Chelsea received over $1 million to fund her influencer lifestyle, which she clearly did not claim on her personal tax returns. I am preparing a comprehensive brief for the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Forensic auditors are going to descend on your father's company and your sister's LLC like locusts. They are going to tear their fake empire apart down to the last penny. Let them, I said coldly. Make sure there is not a single loophole left for them to crawl through. I have the legal side completely locked down, Donovan assured me. The federal gears are turning as we speak. But Meredith, I need you to understand that when this drops, the fallout will be catastrophic. Your father is a cornered animal, and cornered animals are dangerous. You need to make sure your own affairs are entirely in order. You cannot depend on this trust fund money becoming available to you immediately. The funds will be tied up in the federal forfeiture and recovery process for months. You need to secure your own future independently. I already am, I told him. Keep Winston safe, I will handle the rest. I ended the call and closed the encrypted messaging app. Donovan was right. I could not just sit around waiting for the stolen millions to be returned to my bank account. My parents had spent my entire life convincing the world that I was a failure. If I destroyed them using only my grandfather's money, they would just spin a new narrative. They would claim I was a gold digger who orchestrated a hostile takeover of the family wealth. I needed to prove that my success was entirely self-made, completely divorced from their toxic legacy. I showered, changed into my most professional business attire, and headed straight to the small, rundown commercial office space I rented for my startup. It was a dreary Tuesday morning, but the energy in my makeshift office was electric. My small team of developers was huddled around a bank of monitors, monitoring the live data feed from our educational software. For the past 3 months, we had been running a massive beta test across 6 underfunded public school districts in the greater Chicago area. Our software utilized a unique adaptive learning algorithm designed to identify knowledge gaps in real time and provide customized tutoring modules for students falling behind in STEM subjects. It was the project my father had called a charity case. It was the business my mother had deemed an embarrassment. Meredith, you need to see this, my lead developer David called out as I walked through the door. The final assessment metrics from the beta test just compiled. I rushed over to his workstation and stared at the glowing graphs on the screen. The results were not just good, they were astronomical. Across all 6 districts, student retention rates in advanced mathematics and science had improved by 42%. The software had drastically reduced the burden on overworked teachers while providing targeted individual support to thousands of struggling students. We had effectively built a scalable, highly profitable solution to one of the biggest crises in modern public education. We did it, I whispered, staring at the data with tears pricking the corners of my eyes. This was not stolen money. This was not a fake influencer brand built on lies and filters. This was real, tangible, world-changing value created from nothing but grit, late nights, and absolute dedication. Get the presentation deck finalized, I instructed David, my voice steady and commanding. Polish the user interface metrics and package the raw data reports. We have a meeting with the acquisition team from Silicon Valley on Thursday. They wanted proof of concept before they committed to a buyout. We just gave them the Holy Grail. For the next 3 days, while my family basked in their perceived victory and Donovan quietly orchestrated their legal doom, I barely slept. I pitched, I negotiated, and I leveraged every single metric our beta test had produced. I sat in high-rise corporate boardrooms across the city, fiercely defending the value of the software I had built while freezing in the dark. I did not need my father's stolen logistics money. I did not need my mother's country club connections. I secured my own future through sheer undeniable competence. I finalized the terms, signed the contracts, and solidified a future that made my grandfather's trust fund look like pocket change. I was fully armed, entirely independent, and completely ready for the war that was about to arrive at my doorstep. The war arrived on a Thursday morning exactly 2 days after I finalized the Silicon Valley acquisition. I was sitting at my battered laminate desk in the center of our dingy, open-plan office, drinking a cup of stale coffee. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with their usual annoying hum. David and the rest of the development team were in the break room, quietly celebrating the buyout with a box of cheap donuts. I had told them to keep the celebration absolutely silent. Outside these 4 walls, we were still officially a struggling pre-revenue charity case. The heavy glass door at the front of the office swung open with a sharp, jarring screech. I did not need to look up to know who had just crossed the threshold. The overpowering scent of my mother's expensive floral perfume hit the stale office air a full second before her designer heels clicked against the scuffed linoleum floor. I slowly raised my head from my monitor. Mitchell and Beatrice stood in the center of my dilapidated workspace, looking around with expressions of profound, unfiltered disgust. My father wore a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than my entire annual rent for this commercial space. My mother was draped in a pristine white cashmere coat, holding her designer handbag tightly against her chest, as if the poverty of my surroundings might somehow rub off on her. "What a thoroughly depressing little room," Beatrice announced, her voice echoing loudly in the quiet office. She reached out and ran a manicured finger along the edge of a wobbly filing cabinet, inspecting her fingertip for dust before wiping it on a tissue. "I do not understand how you can breathe in here, Meredith. It smells like desperation and cheap electronics. No wonder your business is failing." I did not rise from my chair. I simply leaned back, folding my hands in my lap. "To what do I owe the pleasure of this visit?" I asked, keeping my voice completely devoid of emotion. "I sent my apology to the group chat. I told you I was dropping the issue." Mitchell stepped forward, placing both of his hands flat on my cheap desk and looming over me. The arrogant smirk on his face was chilling. "You did send an apology." He acknowledged, his voice low and menacing. "And it was a very nice, compliant little text message. But your mother and I are not stupid, Meredith. We know that a text message is not a legally binding contract." He stood up straight, adjusting his expensive silk tie. "You caused a massive scene at the restaurant. You made wild defamatory accusations about our family finances in front of your grandfather. Winston is still recovering in the cardiac wing, and the doctors say his memory of the event might be fragmented. But I am not willing to leave anything to chance. I am not going to let a bitter failing dropout hold a fabricated financial dispute over my head." "It was not fabricated," I said quietly. "You know exactly what you did with the trust fund." Beatrice let out a sharp, condescending sigh. "Oh, stop playing the victim, Meredith. We made a strategic executive decision. We are here today to help you understand that your little temper tantrum is officially over. Your father has come up with a very generous solution to put this entire ugly misunderstanding behind us permanently." Mitchell reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a thick, legal-sized envelope. He tossed it onto my desk with a heavy thud. It landed right on top of my keyboard. "I do not trust your sudden change of heart," Mitchell stated flatly. Cornered people have a tendency to lash out when they realize they have lost. So I am removing your ability to lash out. Inside that envelope is a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, along with a formal renunciation of rights. By signing it, you legally acknowledge that any and all funds previously routed from Winston's trust were dispersed with your full retroactive consent. You will permanently waive any claim to the $5,000 monthly stipend, the $4 million principal, and any future assets from the estate. I stared at the thick manila envelope. The absolute sheer audacity of the demand was staggering. They had stolen my entire future to buy sports cars and country club memberships, and now they wanted me to sign a piece of paper legally, thanking them for the privilege of being robbed. And what happens if I refuse to sign? I asked, keeping my gaze locked on my father's cold eyes. What happens if I decide that a text message apology was enough and I throw this envelope in the trash? Mitchell smiled. It was a terrifying, predatory expression. I was hoping you would ask that, he said smoothly. He reached into his other pocket and produced a second, much thinner piece of paper. He slid it across the desk, stopping it exactly an inch from my hand. Take a look at the letterhead, Meredith. I looked down. The document bore the official seal of the Cook County Commercial Real Estate Board. Below that was a formal legal heading, typed in bold, capitalized letters. It was a 48-hour notice of eviction. I do not understand, I said, allowing a tone of genuine confusion to slip into my voice for a fraction of a second. My rent is paid through the end of the month. My landlord is a holding company out of Springfield. Mitchell let out a dark, rumbling laugh. Your landlord was a holding company out of Springfield. Past tense. As of yesterday morning, the deed to this entire commercial building was purchased in a private, expedited cash sale. The new owner is a corporate entity called Apex Logistics and Property Management. Does that name ring a bell? My blood ran completely cold as the horrific reality of his words snapped into focus. Apex Logistics was the primary shell company my father used to wash the stolen trust fund money. You bought this building. I whispered, the sickening truth washing over me. I did. Mitchell confirmed, his eyes gleaming with sadistic triumph. It is a terrible investment, frankly. The plumbing is shot and the foundation is cracking, but it was worth every single penny just to see the look on your face right now. And the best part, Meredith, I bought the roof over your head using the exact same trust fund money you were crying about at the restaurant. Beatrice stepped forward, resting a hand on my father's shoulder, her face glowing with malicious pride. Your father is a brilliant businessman, darling. He knew you would try to be stubborn. So he simply acquired the one thing you care about more than yourself. Your pathetic little charity startup. Mitchell tapped a perfectly manicured finger against the eviction notice. I am the landlord now. And as the property owner, I am officially terminating your commercial lease due to breach of contract regarding the unapproved use of the premises. I have a team of private security contractors waiting on standby. If you do not sign that non-disclosure agreement by 5 o'clock today, those contractors will arrive here on Friday morning. They will physically drag you and your little coding team out onto the sidewalk. They will seize your servers, confiscate your hardware, and lock the doors. Your business will be entirely homeless and permanently destroyed. The silence in the office was deafening. In the break room behind me, I could hear David shifting uncomfortably, having clearly overheard the entire exchange. My parents were not just threatening me, they were openly bragging about using my stolen inheritance to orchestrate my absolute professional destruction. You used my own money to buy my office just so you could evict me, I stated, wanting to hear him confirm it one more time. I needed to burn this moment into my memory forever. I used my money, Mitchell corrected sharply. Money that I reallocated because you are unfit to manage it. You are a failure, Meredith. You have always been a failure. You tried to build a company on a pipe dream, and now you are looking at the consequences of your incompetence. You have exactly two choices. You sign away the trust fund, keep your mouth shut, and I let you stay in this dump of an office. Or you refuse and I watch you lose the only thing you have left in this world. Beatrice leaned over the desk, her face inches from mine. Do the smart thing for once in your life, Meredith. Sign the papers. Chelsea is hosting a massive launch party for her new wellness boutique this weekend. We have reporters and investors coming from all over the city. We simply cannot have your toxic drama ruining her big day. Sign the NDA, save your silly little software project, and fade back into the background where you belong. My father checked his heavy gold watch, the one I knew he had purchased the day after he drained my first major dividend payout. The clock is ticking. You have until 5 o'clock tonight. If I do not have a signed notarized copy of that non-disclosure agreement on my desk by the close of business, consider yourself permanently evicted. Without waiting for my response, Mitchell turned on his heel and strode toward the glass door. Beatrice gave me one final pitying look, wrapping her pristine white coat tightly around her shoulders. "Try not to make a mess when you pack up your desk," she said coldly. The heavy glass door swung shut behind them, the screeching sound echoing through the stale office air. I watched through the dirty front window as they climbed into the back of a sleek black town car idling at the curb. The driver pulled away, merging smoothly into the Chicago traffic, leaving me alone with an eviction notice and a demand to sign my life away. David walked out of the break room, his face pale and his eyes wide with shock. "Meredith," he stammered, staring at the legal documents resting on my keyboard. "Did he really just buy our building? Are we getting kicked out? What are we going to do?" I looked down at the 48-hour eviction notice. My father thought he had executed a brilliant, flawless checkmate. He thought he had backed me into an inescapable corner, using my own stolen wealth as the weapon to break my spirit. He was absolutely convinced that I was trapped, terrified, and completely out of options. I slowly reached across the desk and picked up a black ink pen. I did not feel terrified. I did not feel broken. I felt the overwhelming, intoxicating thrill of absolute certainty. My parents had just walked directly into a trap of their own making, and they were completely oblivious to the fact that the jaws were already snapping shut. I pulled the cap off the black ink pen. David was still standing in the doorway of the break room, his face a portrait of absolute panic. I looked down at the 48-hour eviction notice my father had so proudly delivered. At the bottom was a line for the tenant to acknowledge receipt. I did not hesitate. I signed my name with a fluid, steady flourish. Then I picked up the thick manila envelope containing the non-disclosure agreement, the exact document that would have legally signed away my $4 million trust fund to the people who stole it. I walked over to the heavy-duty paper shredder in the corner of our cramped office, turned the power switch on, and fed the thick packet directly into the grinding metal teeth. The machine whined and chewed through the heavy paper, turning my parents' master plan into a pile of useless confetti. "Meredith," David said, his voice trembling so badly he could barely get the words out. "What are you doing? He's going to lock us out. We have the server migration scheduled for this weekend. We have the school district onboarding starting on Monday. If we lose this office space, the company is completely dead. We have nowhere to go." I turned to face my lead developer. For the first time in 5 years, the crushing, suffocating weight of survival was entirely gone from my shoulders. The constant low-grade terror of wondering how I was going to pay the electric bill or keep my team employed had simply vanished. I looked at David, and I smiled. It was not a tight, stressed expression. It was a massive, beaming, completely unfiltered smile of pure triumph. "David, gather the team," I said clearly, my voice ringing through the stale office air. "Tell everyone to come out here right now. Stop whatever you are coding. I have an announcement to make." Within seconds, the 6 developers who had stuck with me through missed paychecks and freezing office temperatures gathered around my scuffed laminate desk. They looked terrified, clearly expecting me to announce that we were declaring bankruptcy and shutting down the servers. I took a deep breath, savoring the absolute beauty of the moment I was about to create. I let my parents leave here gloating. I told my team, my eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. My father just walked out that door, absolutely convinced that he holds my entire future in the palm of his hand. He bought this commercial building using funds he stole from my grandfather. He thinks that by issuing a 48-hour eviction notice, he has backed me into an inescapable corner. He believes we are about to be homeless and bankrupt. I paused, letting the severity of the threat settle over the room before I shattered it completely. But my father made a fatal miscalculation. I continued, my voice steady and vibrating with power. He judged my business based on his own archaic failing logistics models. He thought we were just a charity case. He had no idea what we actually built in this room. On Tuesday morning, while my family was busy plotting how to steal my inheritance, I sat in a high-rise boardroom downtown with the acquisition executives from a major Silicon Valley firm. I showed them the data from our public school beta tests. I showed them the 42% increase in student retention and our proprietary adaptive learning algorithms. David took a step forward, his eyes widening behind his glasses. Meredith, what did they say? They did not just want to license the software, David. I smiled, the joy finally breaking through my professional composure. They wanted the entire company. We closed the deal yesterday morning. The ink is dry, the contracts are filed, and the corporate transition is officially underway. They acquired our software, our algorithms, and this entire development team for $35 million. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a stunning, breathless quiet. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. $35 million was a number so astronomically high that it defied comprehension for a team of people who had been living on instant ramen and cheap coffee. I pulled out my phone and opened my newly established corporate banking app. I bypassed the personal checking account that previously held $42 and navigated to the primary corporate holding account. I held the screen up for the team to see. The digital display showed a cleared, verified, fully authenticated wire transfer for my majority share of the buyout, alongside the massive retention bonuses allocated for every single developer in the room. I am officially a multimillionaire. I announced, the reality of the words finally sinking into my own bones. And every single person standing in this room is receiving a six-figure payout for your loyalty and your brilliant code. The office erupted. David dropped his coffee mug on the floor, the ceramic shattering and spilling dark liquid across the scuffed linoleum. But nobody cared. The team was cheering, laughing, and pulling each other into massive hugs. Some of them were openly crying. We had fought through the trenches of the startup world, and we had actually won. We had achieved the holy grail of the tech industry. I waited for the cheers to die down just a fraction before I held up my hand to deliver the final piece of the puzzle. I went to my bottom desk drawer and pulled out a sleek silver presentation folder. My father thinks he is kicking us out onto the street, I told my team, my voice brimming with fierce, unapologetic triumph. He thinks he bought our home just to destroy us. But what he actually bought is a crumbling, asbestos-filled liability with failing plumbing, a cracked foundation, and a leaking roof. He grossly overpaid for a toxic commercial property because he was blinded by his own spite. He thought he was trapping us. I opened the silver folder and pulled out a crisp, heavy stock document. Because yesterday afternoon, immediately after the acquisition funds cleared, I signed a 5-year commercial lease for our new corporate headquarters. I secured a 10,000-square-foot state-of-the-art tech campus in the West Loop. It has floor-to-ceiling windows, biometric security access, dedicated server rooms with redundant power grids, and a fully catered on-site cafeteria. I tossed the eviction notice my father had given me directly into the trash can. We are not being evicted, I declared. We are upgrading. The profound irony of Mitchell's master plan was almost too delicious to bear. My father had taken stolen money, committed federal wire fraud, and rushed a cash purchase of a worthless commercial building just to torture me. Now he owned a toxic property that he could not possibly sell to anyone else. And in less than 48 hours, the federal government was going to seize it anyway, as part of the asset forfeiture protocol. He had literally trapped his own stolen assets in unsellable real estate right before the Internal Revenue Service kicked his front door down. Pack your personal items, I instructed the team, grabbing my own coat from the back of my chair. Leave the cheap desks, leave the broken office chairs, leave the wobbly filing cabinets and the terrible coffee maker. Apex Logistics and Property Management can keep all of it. We have a professional moving and installation crew meeting us at the new campus in exactly 3 hours to outfit the entire space with brand new ergonomic equipment. We are leaving this basement behind forever. As the developers scrambled to pack their backpacks and laptops, my phone rang. The caller ID flashed Richard Donovan's name. I walked over to the front window looking out at the gray Chicago street and answered the call. "The trap is officially set, Meredith," the attorney reported, his deep voice radiating grim satisfaction. "I just walked out of the federal courthouse. The judge reviewed your forensic data packet and immediately signed the injunctions under seal. The comprehensive asset freeze will go into effect at exactly midnight on Friday. Your grandfather is stable but remains heavily sedated in the cardiac unit." As expected, Mitchell's lawyers filed the emergency conservatorship petition this morning, but it is going to hit a reinforced brick wall the absolute second the federal freeze triggers across their banking networks. I let out a slow, steady breath. "My father just left my office," I told Donovan. "He served me with a 48-hour eviction notice. He used the stolen trust funds to purchase this commercial building through one of his shell companies just so he could personally throw my business out onto the street. He demanded I sign a non-disclosure agreement to keep my office." I heard Donovan let out a rich, booming laugh over the phone. It was the sound of a legal predator admiring a perfectly executed kill. "Your father just tied a concrete block around his own neck and jumped into the middle of the ocean," the attorney said. "When the federal investigators trace that specific commercial real estate purchase back to the stolen trust fund routing numbers, they are going to officially add money laundering to his growing list of federal charges." He handed them the final nail for his own coffin. I tore up the non-disclosure agreement and fed it into the shredder, I informed him. "And my software company was acquired yesterday for $35 million. I do not need his rotting building. I am moving my team into our new corporate campus in the West Loop this afternoon." There was a brief stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Well then," Donovan finally said, a profound note of respect entering his tone. "It appears I am representing a very wealthy, highly dangerous young woman. Your family has absolutely no idea what is about to hit them. Are you ready for the launch party on Saturday?" "I am more than ready," I promised him. "I will see you and the federal agents at the venue." I hung up the phone and slipped it into my pocket. I was no longer the exhausted, starving girl begging for scraps of affection from a family that deeply despised me. I was a self-made multimillionaire backed by the top legal and forensic minds in the entire city. The game board had completely flipped. My mother and sister were currently busy planning a red carpet launch party for a fake wellness boutique, completely unaware that their premium credit cards were about to turn into useless pieces of plastic. They wanted to make me the invisible, shameful secret of the family. They wanted to build their glittering empire on my broken back. Instead, I was going to be the absolute architect of their public ruin. I looked around the dismal, freezing office one last time, turned off the flickering overhead lights, and walked out the glass door without ever looking back. The transition into the new West Loop Tech campus was seamless. By Wednesday afternoon, my entire development team was set up at brand-new, ergonomic workstations surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the bustling city. The air in the new office smelled of fresh paint and expensive espresso, a far cry from the damp, moldy basement we had occupied just 24 hours prior. I stood in my private glass-walled office, watching my team work with renewed vigor. The $35 million acquisition had fundamentally changed our reality, but we all knew there was still work to be done. We were integrating our systems with the Silicon Valley servers, preparing for the massive national rollout of our educational software. For a brief, peaceful moment, I allowed myself to simply enjoy the quiet hum of success. But I knew my family too well. The silence from my end after the eviction notice was not what they expected. They expected me to panic, to call them crying, to beg for my cheap office space back. My absolute radio silence must have set off alarm bells in their paranoid minds. When toxic people feel their control slipping, they do not just sit back and wait. They strike. The strike came on Thursday morning. I was in the middle of a video conference with our new corporate integration team when David practically sprinted into my glass office. He did not even bother knocking. His face was flushed, and he was gripping his smartphone so tightly his knuckles were white. He gestured frantically for me to mute my microphone. I quickly apologized to the integration team, muted the call, and looked at my lead developer. "What is wrong?" I asked, my voice calm. Did a server go down? David shook his head, looking absolutely sick to his stomach. It is not the servers, Meredith. It is your sister. You need to see this right now. It is everywhere. He handed me his phone. The screen was displaying Chelsea's primary social media account. She had just uploaded a 10-minute video to her 500,000 followers. The thumbnail showed her sitting on her pristine white velvet sofa, wearing no makeup, her hair tied in a messy bun to simulate distress. The title of the video was simply Family Heartbreak and Setting Boundaries. I pressed play. The video began with Chelsea taking a deep, shuddering breath and wiping away a perfectly timed single tear. "Hey guys," Chelsea started, her voice quivering with manufactured vulnerability. "I usually only share positivity and wellness tips on this channel, but today I need to be completely transparent with you. My family is going through an incredibly dark, painful time right now. As many of you know, my beloved grandfather recently suffered a massive heart attack and is currently fighting for his life in the intensive care unit." She paused to press a tissue against her eye, making sure the camera caught the raw emotion of her performance. "What you do not know," Chelsea continued, staring deeply into the lens, "is what caused his heart attack. I have an older sister. I do not talk about her because she has struggled with severe, untreated mental health issues for years. My parents and I have done everything we can to support her. We have given her money, paid for her therapy, and tried to help her launch a little software business. But nothing is ever enough for her. She is incredibly toxic and deeply unstable." My jaw tightened as I watched her spin her web of absolute lies. She was weaponizing my past struggles, twisting the narrative to make herself look like the benevolent savior. A few nights ago at my grandfather's birthday dinner, my sister had a complete mental breakdown. Chelsea said, her voice dropping to a dramatic whisper. She demanded a massive amount of money from our grandfather's estate. When we tried to calm her down, she became violent and verbally abusive. The stress of her extortion attempt directly caused my grandfather's cardiac arrest. And now, while he is lying in a coma, she is actively harassing my parents. She is threatening to ruin my business launch this weekend if we do not pay her off. She is a dangerous, greedy person, and we are being forced to take legal action to protect ourselves from her extortion. Chelsea looked directly into the camera, delivering her final sickening blow. "I am sharing this because I want to be authentic with my community. It is so hard to cut ties with toxic family members, but sometimes you have to protect your own peace. Please send prayers for my grandfather." I paused the video. The view count was already climbing past 300,000. The comment section was a rapid-fire stream of absolute vitriol directed at the unnamed psychotic sister. Her followers were calling me a monster, a gold digger, a sociopath who deserved to be locked up. They were praising Chelsea for her bravery, calling her an inspiration for setting boundaries with abusive family members. "She is trying to destroy you," David said, his voice shaking with anger. "Meredith, she is preemptively assassinating your character. If our new corporate partners see this, or if the school districts see it, they might pull out. Morality clauses are standard in these acquisition contracts." As if on cue, the sleek new office phone on my desk began to ring. It was an external call. I glanced at the caller ID and saw the name of the superintendent for one of our largest participating school districts. The fallout was already beginning. I took a deep breath, compartmentalized the white-hot rage burning in my chest, and picked up the receiver. "Good morning, Superintendent. This is Meredith." "Meredith," the superintendent began, his tone stiff and deeply uncomfortable. "I am calling regarding a viral video that was just forwarded to the school board. It appears to feature your sister making some very severe allegations about your mental stability and attempted extortion. As you know, our district cannot be associated with any entity involved in criminal investigations or public scandals." I kept my voice smooth, professional, and entirely unbothered. "I understand your concern completely, sir," I replied. "Let me assure you, this is nothing more than a desperate smear campaign orchestrated by estranged family members who are currently the subjects of an active federal investigation. My legal counsel is already handling the defamation aspect. I can guarantee you that within 48 hours, The truth regarding their financial crimes will be a matter of public record, and my name will be entirely cleared. Our acquisition by our Silicon Valley partners remains fully intact, and our rollout schedule will not be impacted by this petty social media drama. I projected such absolute bulletproof confidence that the superintendent audibly relaxed on the other end of the line. We spoke for another 5 minutes, and by the time I hung up, his concerns were entirely mitigated. I handled 3 more similar calls from minor clients over the next hour, extinguishing their panic with cold, hard professionalism. I was not the fragile girl my family thought I was. I knew how to manage a crisis. But the professional fallout was only one side of the attack. My personal cell phone was practically vibrating off the desk. Chelsea's video had clearly been circulated through the extended family group chats. Because I had not responded to the eviction notice, my parents had evidently decided to unleash the entire family network on me to break my spirit. I unlocked my phone and watched the notifications flood the screen. It was a torrential downpour of digital abuse. Aunt Vivian sent a massive block of text. "You are an absolute disgrace, Meredith. How dare you extort your own grandfather on his deathbed? You have always been a bitter, jealous girl. We all knew it was a mistake for Mitchell to keep supporting your failed business. Do not ever contact this family again. You are dead to us." My cousin Robert, who had borrowed money from my father last year, chimed in right after. "You make me sick. Chelsea has worked so hard for her brand, and you are trying to ruin her launch party because you are a pathetic gold digger. Stay away from the hospital." Message after message poured in. They called me a leech. They called me a narcissist. They accused me of elder abuse. My mother had clearly spent the morning calling every single relative, spinning the narrative that I was a deranged, greedy monster who had caused Winston's heart attack and was now attempting to blackmail the family. They were building an echo chamber of pure hatred, reinforcing each other's lies to ensure I had absolutely nowhere left to turn. Chelsea had launched this preemptive strike because she was terrified. They had served me an eviction notice threatening to make me homeless, and I had simply walked away without a fight. My absolute silence had spooked them. They knew I had seen the trust fund ledger. They knew I knew about the stolen money. By posting that video, Chelsea was trying to get ahead of the story. She was setting the stage so that if I ever tried to report their theft, everyone would simply view it as the frantic, fabricated revenge of a mentally unstable extortionist. It was a remarkably cunning PR strategy. It was also incredibly stupid. I did not block the incoming messages. I did not delete the vitriol. I sat at my desk and systematically took screenshots of every single hateful text, every threatening voicemail, and every defamatory comment left by my extended family. I downloaded a high-resolution copy of Chelsea's video. I opened my encrypted messaging channel with Donovan and uploaded the entire batch of new evidence. "Look at what the golden child just posted," I typed to the attorney. "She is accusing me of extortion and elder abuse in front of 500,000 people. Add this to the pile. I want civil defamation and libel suits prepared for Monday morning." Donovan replied less than a minute later. His response was chillingly brief. "I am archiving it now, Meredith. She just quantified the exact monetary value of her own destruction. The federal judge approved the asset forfeiture warrants 30 minutes ago. The IRS Criminal Division has been briefed. The financial guillotine drops at midnight on Friday. Focus on your dress for the launch party. I will bring the federal agents." I locked my phone and set it on the polished glass desk of my new corporate office. My family had unleashed a social media mob to tear my reputation to shreds. They thought public humiliation would force me into hiding. They thought I would be too ashamed to show my face at Chelsea's glittering high society wellness launch on Saturday night. They were wrong. I was not going to hide. I was going to walk directly into the center of their fake, stolen world, and I was going to turn the lights on. I did not respond to a single text message. I did not post a rebuttal video. I did not log onto social media to defend myself against the absolute tidal wave of fabricated outrage Chelsea had orchestrated. When you are preparing to detonate a legal and financial nuclear bomb, you do not waste your time arguing with the casualties. I let them scream into the digital void, absolutely convinced of their own untouchable superiority. Instead, I spent Friday morning sitting in a secure windowless conference room in the federal building downtown. I was flanked by Donovan and two stone-faced agents from the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. The digital forensics package I had compiled was projected onto a massive screen at the end of the long mahogany table. We spent 3 grueling hours walking the agents through every single line of code, every spoofed IP address, and every meticulously documented interstate wire transfer. Mitchell made a fatal error when he decided to route the stolen trust funds through Nevada. Before bringing them back to Illinois, one of the federal agents noted adjusting his glasses as he studied the transfer logs. If he had just moved the money between local Chicago banks, we would be looking at a messy, drawn-out civil suit regarding the forged power of attorney. But the moment he used electronic communications to cross state lines in the commission of a financial crime, he triggered federal jurisdiction. And the tax implications, Donovan asked, pressing our advantage. The second agent offered a grim, shark-like smile. Mitchell used $1.5 million of untaxed stolen capital to artificially inflate the earnings reports of his logistics firm. Chelsea failed to report over $1 million of stolen income, yet blatantly documented the resulting luxury purchases on public platforms. We are looking at massive deliberate tax evasion on top of the wire fraud. The asset forfeiture warrants have already been executed by a federal judge under seal. As of midnight tonight, every single account attached to their Social Security numbers or corporate tax ID numbers will be frozen solid. I sat back in my chair, feeling a cold, clinical satisfaction wash over me. My parents had spent my entire life telling me I was a failure because I did not understand how the real world worked. They had mocked my business. They had laughed at my struggles. They had literally stolen my survival money and bought a commercial building just to evict me and watch me suffer. Now they were about to be crushed by the absolute unforgiving reality of the federal justice system. Before we finalized the operational details for the asset freeze, Donovan received an urgent encrypted text message. He looked down at his phone, his expression shifting from professional detachment to sudden intense relief. Meredith Donovan, said, his voice dropping to a serious register. That was the head cardiologist at Chicago General. Winston just woke up. They removed the breathing tube and he is fully conscious and responsive. The breath caught in my throat. Despite the impending victory, the fear that I might lose my grandfather had been a heavy, suffocating weight pressing down on my chest for days. I stood up from the conference table so fast my chair scraped loudly against the floor. We need to go, I told Donovan, now. We arrived at the hospital 20 minutes later. I did not care if Mitchell or Beatrice were prowling the corridors. I had Donovan, a heavily respected legal titan, walking right beside me. We bypassed the waiting room entirely and headed straight for the cardiac intensive care unit. A pair of private security guards hired by Donovan the night of the heart attack to ensure my parents could not isolate Winston stood outside the heavy glass doors of his private suite. They stepped aside, allowing us to enter. My grandfather looked small against the stark white hospital linens. He was hooked up to a terrifying array of monitors and IV lines, and his skin was pale, but his eyes were open, and they were sharp. The moment he saw me, a weak but genuine smile touched his lips. Meredith. He rasped, his voice rough from the intubation tube. You look like you have not slept in a week. I rushed to his bedside and carefully took his hand, tears finally spilling over my eyelashes. I am so sorry, Grandpa. I am so sorry about the dinner and the stress and all of this. Winston squeezed my hand with surprising strength. Do not apologize for surviving, my dear. You have absolutely nothing to be sorry for. He shifted his gaze to the attorney standing at the foot of the bed. Donovan, tell me everything. Do not sugarcoat it. Donovan opened his briefcase and pulled out a condensed, hard-copy version of the forensic audit I had created. He handed it to Winston. My grandfather adjusted his reading glasses and began to review the documents. The silence in the hospital room was heavy and loaded with years of unspoken family tension. I watched Winston's face as he read. I watched the realization dawn on him. I watched him comprehend the sheer scale of his son's betrayal. He saw the forged power of attorney. He saw the millions siphoned into the failing logistics company. He saw the luxury cars and the country club memberships, bought with money that was meant to keep his granddaughter from freezing in the dark. "Mitchell stole it," Winston finally said, his voice dropping to a low, devastated whisper. "He stole your future, Meredith, and Beatrice and Chelsea helped him spend it." "They did not just steal it," I added quietly, the anger bubbling up beneath my exhaustion. "Mitchell bought the commercial building where I run my software company. He came to my office yesterday, handed me a 48-hour eviction notice, and told me that if I did not sign a non-disclosure agreement, permanently waiving my rights to the trust fund, he would throw my business out onto the street. He used my stolen money to try and destroy the only thing I had left." Winston closed his eyes. The monitors beside his bed beeped slightly faster, registering his rising stress, but he took a slow, deep breath to steady himself. He had built a massive empire from the ground up. He was not a man who crumbled under pressure, not even when the pressure was applied by his own son. "I am an old man," Meredith Winston said, opening his eyes and looking directly at me. I wanted to believe the best about my family. I wanted to believe that Mitchell was just misguided, that Beatrice was just difficult, and that Chelsea was just young. I ignored the warning signs for decades, because it was easier than confronting the ugly truth. But this is not just greed. This is pure, unadulterated malice. They tried to break you. He turned his fierce gaze toward the attorney. Donovan did. Mitchell attempted to secure medical proxy or conservatorship while I was unconscious. He filed the emergency petition less than 12 hours after you collapsed, Donovan confirmed grimly. He was attempting to lock down the estate and wipe the servers before you woke up, or Meredith could intervene. Fortunately, Meredith managed to execute a flawless digital forensic audit. We have handed the entire file over to the IRS and federal investigators. The asset forfeiture warrants have been signed. The federal freeze hits their accounts tonight at midnight. Winston nodded slowly, his expression hardening into a mask of absolute unforgiving resolve. He had loved his son, but he loved justice more. "Donovan, draft the paperwork immediately," Winston commanded, his voice gaining strength. "I am completely dissolving Mitchell's inheritance. I am disinheriting Beatrice and Chelsea. I want every single cent, every property, every corporate holding, and every liquid asset transferred directly into a new irrevocable trust. And I want Meredith named as the sole absolute executive trustee." I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. "Grandpa, no, you do not have to do that. The acquisition money from Silicon Valley just cleared. I am financially secure. I do not need the estate." "This is not about what you need," Meredith Winston said fiercely, reaching out to grip my hand again. "This is about who deserves to carry the family legacy." Mitchell and Beatrice built an empire on lies, theft, and cruelty. You built your success on sheer grit, brilliance, and integrity. I am not giving you control of the estate because you need the money. I am giving you control because you are the only person in this family capable of wielding that kind of power without turning into a monster. Donovan pulled a pre-drafted legal document from his briefcase. He had anticipated Winston's reaction entirely. He handed my grandfather a pen. Winston did not hesitate. He signed his name with a sharp, definitive stroke, legally executing the total transfer of power. Mitchell thought he was running out the clock. He thought he was going to take over the empire. Instead, his father had just handed the keys to the kingdom directly to the daughter he had spent 30 years trying to destroy. "You execute the freeze tonight," Donovan Winston ordered, handing the paperwork back to the attorney. "Let the federal agents tear their lives apart." "And Meredith?" I leaned closer. "Yes, Grandpa Chelsea's little wellness boutique launch party is tomorrow night. Is it not?" Winston asked, a dark, perfectly calculated smirk appearing on his tired face. "Yes," I replied, matching his expression. "It is a massive red carpet event. They invited the press, investors, and half the country club." Winston nodded in absolute satisfaction. "Good. I want you to walk into that party, Meredith. I want you to stand in the middle of their fake stolen world, and I want you to end this once and for all. Take them down." Saturday evening arrived with a crisp, biting chill sweeping off Lake Michigan, but inside Chelsea Wellness and Lifestyle, the climate was artificially, meticulously perfect. The flagship boutique occupied a prime corner of downtown Chicago real estate, boasting towering floor-to-ceiling glass displays filled with overpriced crystal-infused water bottles, organic silk yoga mats, and imported vegan skincare lines. A genuine red carpet spilled out onto the sidewalk, flanked by heavy velvet ropes and eager local press photographers holding flashing cameras. Inside the venue, waiters in tailored white jackets glided effortlessly through the tightly packed crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with vintage champagne flutes and impossibly tiny organic hors d'oeuvres. The guest list was a highly curated collection of Chicago's absolute elite. Socialites, venture capitalists, influential lifestyle bloggers, and the upper echelon of Beatrice's exclusive country club circle mingled under cascading, extravagant arrangements of white orchids. It was a monument to vanity and superficial success built entirely on a foundation of stolen money. I stood across the street in the deep shadows, sitting in the back of a black unmarked Suburban, with Donovan and two federal agents from the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. We watched the glittering spectacle unfold through the heavily tinted windows. The federal asset forfeiture warrants had officially triggered at midnight. Right now, every premium credit card, every offshore bank account, every single cent attached to my family's personal and corporate names was completely, irrevocably locked. They just did not know it yet. Because they were currently surrounded by unimaginable wealth and social adoration, they felt entirely invincible. I checked my watch. The time for hiding was over. Inside the venue, the ambient pulsing house music slowly faded out. Mitchell stepped up to a small, sleek acrylic podium at the front of the boutique, tapping a microphone to command the room's attention. He looked incredibly smug, wearing a bespoke tuxedo, raising his glass to the glittering crowd with the practiced ease of a seasoned politician. "Thank you all for coming out tonight to celebrate my beautiful daughter Chelsea." Mitchell's voice boomed through the high-end surround sound speakers, oozing with manufactured charm. He placed a heavily paternal hand on Chelsea's shoulder. She looked positively radiant, in a custom designer gown, smiling modestly and casting her eyes downward for the flashing cameras. As a father, there is absolutely nothing more rewarding than watching your children succeed through sheer grit, determination, and unyielding passion. We all know that building a global brand from the ground up takes incredible sacrifice. It takes a strong foundation. But most importantly, it takes family. Mitchell paused for dramatic effect, placing his hand over his heart. "Beatrice and I have always believed in nurturing our children's potential, providing them with the exact financial and emotional support they need to thrive in a competitive world. Chelsea is the absolute embodiment of our family values. She is living proof that with hard work, pure intentions, and a supportive family backing you up, you can achieve absolutely anything." The crowd erupted into polite, enthusiastic applause. Beatrice wiped a fake tear from her cheek, dabbing carefully so as not to ruin her makeup. It was a sickening, flawless performance of parental devotion. I pushed the heavy door of the Suburban open. The freezing air hit my face, but I barely registered the temperature. I was not wearing a cheap, threadbare coat tonight. I was wearing a sharply tailored midnight blue designer suit that I had purchased yesterday afternoon, a physical manifestation of my newly cemented reality. I walked across the street, my heels clicking methodically and rhythmically against the pavement. Donovan flanked my right side, carrying his heavy leather briefcase with a grim, purposeful expression. The two plainclothes federal agents flanked my left, their presence projecting a quiet, undeniable, and terrifying authority. We bypassed the velvet ropes entirely. A burly security guard stepped forward to block our path and check the guest list, but one of the agents simply flashed a gold federal badge. The guard instantly stepped back, his eyes widening as he dropped his clipboard to his side. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the boutique. The quiet hum of the sophisticated heating system and the lingering applause of the wealthy guests met my ears. I did not sneak in through the back. I did not hover near the coat check. I walked directly down the center aisle of the boutique, cutting straight through the dense crowd of billionaires, investors, and socialites. My presence caused an immediate physical ripple effect. People instinctively stepped out of my way, parting like the Red Sea. They could feel the massive shift in the atmosphere. The energy in the room went from a warm, celebratory glow to a sharp, freezing tension in a matter of seconds. Conversations abruptly died out. The clinking of crystal glasses ceased. Heads turned eyes tracking my confident, unhurried stride. Several of Beatrice's country club friends recognized me from years past, whispering frantically to one another behind their hands about the sudden appearance of the unstable, estranged daughter. Mitchell was just lifting his champagne glass for a final toast when his eyes locked onto mine. His hand froze in midair. The arrogant paternal smile completely vanished from his face, replaced by a mask of absolute paralyzing shock. Beside him, Chelsea let out a sharp, audible gasp, her manicured hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. Beatrice, standing near the front row of guests, dropped her champagne flute entirely. The delicate crystal shattered against the pristine hardwood floor, the sound ringing out like a gunshot in the suddenly silent room. Meredith Mitchell managed to say into the microphone, his voice tight and straining for control. He quickly lowered the microphone, attempting to salvage his composure and project an air of calm authority to his confused guests. "What are you doing here? This is a private, ticketed event. Security should not have let you inside." I stopped exactly 10 feet from the podium. I did not shrink under the stares of the hundreds of wealthy guests. I stood tall, squaring my shoulders, looking my father directly in the eye, with a gaze forged in 5 years of pure survival. "I am here to celebrate family values, Dad," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent room, without the need for a microphone. "I am here to talk about that strong foundation and all the incredible sacrifice you just mentioned in your beautiful speech." Mitchell's face flushed a deep, angry crimson. He stepped down from the podium, moving quickly toward me, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me, the way he had done in the hospital waiting room. "You need to leave right now," he hissed, keeping his voice dangerously low so the press pool could not hear his threats. "You signed the eviction notice. You lost the building. Do not humiliate yourself in front of these important people. I will have you arrested for trespassing, and I will destroy whatever is left of your pathetic life." I did not back up a single inch. I smiled a cold, predatory expression that made Mitchell hesitate in his tracks. "You cannot have me arrested for trespassing in a building that was purchased with my own stolen money," I replied, matching his low volume, but lacing every word with lethal, unshakable confidence. "And I did not lose anything, Mitchell. I shredded your non-disclosure agreement, and I moved my entire software company to a new corporate campus yesterday afternoon. You bought a toxic, worthless building for absolutely nothing." Beatrice rushed forward, grabbing Mitchell's arm. She plastered a fake, terrifyingly wide smile on her face, turning toward the nearest investors. "Please excuse my eldest daughter, Beatrice," announced loudly, her voice trembling slightly. "She has been struggling with some very severe mental health issues lately. We are trying to get her the psychiatric help she desperately needs. She is just confused." Chelsea stepped off of the podium, tears already welling in her eyes, ready to play the victim for the cameras. "Meredith, please stop doing this," Chelsea cried out, clasping her hands together in a pleading gesture. "You are ruining my launch party. Grandpa Winston is in the hospital because of your toxic outbursts. Why are you trying to extort us? We have done nothing but love you." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. The investors looked deeply uncomfortable, some subtly edging toward the coat check. The press photographers, however, raised their cameras, sensing a massive scandal unfolding in real time. "My grandfather is no longer in a coma." "Chelsea?" I announced, raising my voice so the entire room could hear every single syllable. "He woke up yesterday morning, and he had a very long, very illuminating conversation with his estate attorney regarding the forged power of attorney documents you all used to drain his trust funds." Mitchell stumbled backward as if I had physically struck him. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and terrified. Beatrice let out a small, strangled whimper. The confident, untouchable facade they had maintained for decades was cracking, fracturing into a million pieces under the weight of their own arrogance. I turned my attention to the massive state of the art presentation screen, positioned behind the podium. It currently displayed Chelsea's sleek wellness brand logo in a loop of soothing pastel colors. You talk a lot about transparency and authenticity with your followers, Chelsea, I said, gesturing toward the screen. So I think it is only fair that we show all your generous investors and loyal fans exactly how authentic your brand really is. I think it is time we show everyone exactly who paid for the champagne they are drinking tonight. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small remote clicker synced to the presentation software. I pressed the button, and the atmosphere in the room shifted from tense confusion to impending absolute destruction. The giant screen behind the podium flickered. Chelsea's soothing pastel logo vanished, replaced instantly by a stark high-definition spreadsheet. The document was a masterclass in financial forensics, heavily annotated with bright red highlights, offshore routing numbers, and exact timestamps. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of investors and socialites as they tried to comprehend the massive blocks of data displayed before them. I walked directly up to the acrylic podium, brushing past my paralyzed father, and grasped the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice echoing off the high ceilings and glass displays of the boutique. "I want to sincerely welcome you all to this incredible launch party. We are here to celebrate my sister Chelsea and her unwavering commitment to wellness, authenticity, and family values." I turned toward the screen and raised my hand, pointing to the largest red highlight in the center of the spreadsheet. For instance, I continued, my tone conversational but razor sharp. "I am sure you are all enjoying the imported vintage champagne and the organic caviar. You should know that this entire catering spread was funded by a wire transfer executed on October 12th. That specific transfer moved $45,000 out of a primary trust fund established by my grandfather, a trust fund that was legally solely in my name." The room went deathly quiet. The only sound was the rapid mechanical clicking of the press photographer's cameras capturing every second of the unfolding disaster. I clicked the presentation remote again. The screen transitioned to a new slide, showing a side-by-side comparison of Mitchell's corporate accounts and my stolen trust. "My father, Mitchell, loves to boast about his brilliant business acumen," I announced, looking directly at the prominent venture capitalists in the front row. "What he failed to mention in his speech tonight is that his logistics firm has been technically insolvent for 3 years. He used a forged power of attorney to siphon $1.5 million of my inheritance to quietly pay off his corporate creditors and artificially inflate his earnings reports to his board of directors." Mitchell opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He looked like a man standing on a trapdoor that had just swung open. I clicked to the third slide. It displayed a mosaic of Chelsea's most famous social media posts: her luxury SUV, her designer wardrobe, her first-class flights to Europe, perfectly matched with the exact dates and amounts stolen from my bank account. "And my beautiful sister Chelsea," I said, looking down at her where she stood trembling near the front row. "She built this entire glittering lifestyle brand using over $1 million of untaxed stolen money. She monetized my literal starvation to buy her followers. Every crystal water bottle on these shelves, every silk yoga mat is the direct result of federal wire fraud." The reaction from this crowd was absolute and devastating. The wealthy socialites who had been air-kissing my mother just moments ago physically took steps backward, creating a wide, empty circle around my family. The investors in the room pulled out their phones, frantically texting their legal teams to immediately pull their funding from Chelsea's brand. The social contamination was instantaneous. My family had become radioactive. Chelsea finally snapped out of her shock, her face contorted into a mask of pure, unhinged panic. "Turn that off," she screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice cracking hysterically. "Turn that screen off right now! Security, get her out of here! She is lying. She is insane. Someone get her out of my store." 2 large, burly security guards in dark suits immediately stepped forward from the perimeter of the room, moving aggressively toward the podium to remove me. I did not flinch. I did not take a single step back. I simply looked at Donovan. The esteemed estate attorney gave a curt, precise nod. The 2 plainclothes federal agents stepped squarely in front of me, physically blocking the security guards. In perfect unison, they reached into their jackets and produced their gold federal badges, holding them up for the entire room to see. Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation Division. The lead agent announced his voice, projecting a terrifying booming authority that commanded absolute compliance. "Stand down immediately." The security guards hit the brakes so hard they nearly tripped over their own feet. They raised their hands in the air and backed away slowly, wanting absolutely nothing to do with a federal raid. The lead agent turned his attention directly to my father. "Mitchell, Beatrice, and Chelsea, you are officially being served with federal asset forfeiture warrants regarding the illicit transfer of funds across state lines and massive coordinated tax evasion." The second agent pulled a thick stack of heavy legal documents from his jacket and stepped forward. He thrust the paperwork directly into Mitchell's chest. My father was shaking so violently that he could not even grasp the papers. They hit his expensive tuxedo jacket and scattered across the pristine hardwood floor, landing in a puddle of spilled champagne. As of midnight tonight, the lead agent continued, his voice echoing through the silent, captivated room. Every single financial account, corporate holding, and physical asset attached to your Social Security numbers and corporate tax identification numbers has been completely frozen by a federal judge. You currently have zero access to any capital. You are formally required to surrender your passports to the federal courthouse by Monday morning. Beatrice let out a high, keening wail of despair. She spun around, desperately reaching out to grab the arm of her wealthiest country club friend, a woman she had played tennis with for 15 years. "Please," Beatrice begged, tears streaming down her face and ruining her expensive makeup. "You know us. You know we are good people. This is a mistake." The woman looked at my mother with an expression of profound, chilling disgust. She physically yanked her arm out of my mother's grasp, turned on her heel, and walked straight toward the exit. A mass exodus followed. The elite guests, desperate to avoid being photographed at a federal crime scene, began streaming out the doors, leaving their expensive gift bags behind. The sudden mass departure caused a panic near the catering station. The catering manager, a sharp-eyed man who clearly understood that his massive invoice was suddenly in jeopardy, pushed his way through the remaining crowd. He marched directly up to my father, holding a digital payment terminal. "Sir," the catering manager demanded, his voice tight with anxiety. "Given the circumstances, I need to process the payment for tonight's event immediately. The balance is $28,000 for the food staff and champagne. I need a card right now." Mitchell was hyperventilating, sweat beading on his forehead and soaking the collar of his custom shirt. He frantically dug into his pocket, his hands trembling as he pulled out his wallet. He retrieved his exclusive heavy metal black card, the ultimate symbol of his fake wealth, and thrust it into the manager's hand. "Charge it!" Mitchell barked desperately, trying to cling to the last shred of his billionaire facade. "Charge the card and keep the drinks flowing. This is a misunderstanding. Everything is fine." The catering manager snatched the black card and inserted it into the mobile terminal. The machine thought for a few seconds. Then a harsh, piercing beep echoed through the room. "Decline," the manager stated flatly. Mitchell's eyes widened in horror. "Try it again. The network connection is just bad. Try it again." The manager swiped the card a second time. Another loud, unforgiving beep. "Declined." "Try another card," the manager demanded, his tone turning hostile. My father frantically pulled 3 more premium credit cards from his wallet, shoving them at the manager. One by one, the manager swiped them. Beep, declined. Beep, declined. Beep, declined. The federal freeze was absolute. The unshakable financial fortress my parents had built on my stolen money was gone. They did not have enough liquid capital left to buy a bottle of water. The press photographers, who had remained rooted to their spots, went into an absolute frenzy. The rapid clicking of camera shutters filled the boutique, capturing the exact devastating moment my father realized he was completely ruined. The bright flashes illuminated the sheer terror on his face as he stared empty-handed at the declined payment terminal. Chelsea let out a broken, guttural sob. The realization of her total destruction finally hit her. Her brand was dead. Her followers would crucify her. She had absolutely no money, no skills, and federal agents were standing in her store. The golden child slowly sank to the floor in her custom designer gown, collapsing onto the hardwood amidst the shattered glass and the scattered federal warrants. She buried her face in her hands and wept loudly, crying real tears of profound, inescapable ruin. Beatrice dropped to her knees beside Chelsea, wrapping her arms around her ruined golden child, both of them wailing as the press cameras documented their total humiliation from every angle. I stood at the podium and looked down at the three of them. My father paralyzed with shock and stripped of his power. My mother sobbing hysterically as her high society status evaporated into thin air. My sister curled on the floor in a puddle of her own making. They had stolen my future to build this glittering fake world. They had laughed at my pain and mocked my survival. Now I was watching their empire burn to ash in real time. And as the camera flashes continued to light up the room, I knew it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The flash of the press cameras at the boutique was just the opening salvo in a war of attrition that my family had absolutely no hope of winning. By Sunday morning, the story of the spectacular raid had dominated every local news channel and social media platform in Chicago. The headlines were ruthless: the fraudulent wellness empire, the stolen trust fund, the federal tax evasion. The public narrative shifted instantly, ripping away the carefully curated veneer of the perfect affluent suburban family and exposing the rotting greedy core underneath. I did not give a single interview to the press. I did not need to. The federal indictments and the frozen bank accounts spoke louder than any public relations statement ever could. In the grueling, relentless weeks that followed, the federal government moved with a terrifying efficiency. Mitchell and Beatrice quickly discovered that high society loyalty is entirely conditional upon wealth. The moment the asset forfeiture warrants were unsealed, my parents were completely and utterly ostracized. The prestigious Oak Brook Elite Country Club quietly revoked their platinum membership, citing a violation of their morality clause. Beatrice's wealthy socialite friends, the same women who had air-kissed her cheeks at charity galas for decades, stopped returning her phone calls. They blocked her number and pretended they had barely known her. The social contamination was absolute. My parents were pariahs in the only world they had ever cared about. But the social ruin was nothing compared to the financial devastation. The Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division does not negotiate with thieves. Because my father had used interstate wires to move the stolen $2.5 million, the fines levied against him were astronomical. To satisfy the federal mandates and begin the process of restitution to my grandfather's trust, Mitchell and Beatrice were forced into absolute liquidation. I sat in my corner office at my new tech campus and read the legal updates from Donovan with cold satisfaction. The sprawling suburban mansion, the pristine fortress where I had been raised to feel like a worthless outsider, was seized and put on the market for a rapid cash sale. The federal auditors did not stop there. They auctioned off my mother's entire collection of designer handbags and jewelry. They liquidated my father's luxury sedans, his vintage watch collection, and the antique golf clubs he loved to flaunt. Everything that defined their status was systematically stripped away and sold to the highest bidder to pay back the money they had stolen from my survival fund. Mitchell's logistics company, already drowning in toxic debt that he had hidden with my inheritance, collapsed into Chapter 7 bankruptcy. His corporate board ousted him in a unanimous, humiliating vote. At 60 years old, my father found himself entirely unemployable, blacklisted from the corporate world, with a massive federal fraud conviction hanging permanently around his neck. Within 2 months, my parents were forced to move into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a decaying building on the far outskirts of the city. The heating was unreliable. The walls were paper thin. They had no savings, no assets, and no safety net. They were forced to live exactly the way they had forced me to live for 5 brutal years. Only they lacked the resilience, the work ethic, and the youth to ever climb their way out of it. If my parents' downfall was a slow, agonizing descent, Chelsea's ruin was a catastrophic freefall. The modern influencer economy is built entirely on perception, and Chelsea's brand was instantly toxic. The day after the disastrous boutique launch, her corporate sponsors severed all ties. The luxury skincare brands and organic clothing lines issued public statements distancing themselves from her fraudulent company. Her massive follower count plummeted as the internet collectively turned its righteous fury against the golden child, who had bought a customized Range Rover with money stolen from her sick, starving sister. Her comment sections became a wasteland of mockery and disgust. People scrutinized every single vacation photo and designer outfit she had ever posted, calculating the exact amount of stolen trust fund money she had used to fake her success. Unable to handle the relentless online backlash, Chelsea was forced to permanently delete her social media accounts, erasing the only identity she had ever truly valued. But the digital erasure was just the beginning of her nightmare. Because she had actively participated in the transfer of the stolen funds to prop up Chelsea Wellness and Lifestyle LLC, the federal government seized her business assets. The luxury downtown condo she had bragged about was foreclosed upon. The white Range Rover was repossessed by federal marshals in broad daylight while her former neighbors watched from their balconies. Chelsea was left with absolutely nothing. No money, no brand, no rich parents to bail her out, and no tangible skills to fall back on. For her entire adult life, she had mocked me for working multiple jobs, claiming that my exhaustion was simply a lack of charisma. Now the universe was forcing her to learn a brutal lesson in reality. Through Donovan's investigators, I received a detailed report on my sister's new life. To afford the rent on a tiny, dilapidated studio apartment in a rough neighborhood, Chelsea had been forced to take a minimum wage job in retail. The former wellness influencer who used to spend her days sipping green juice by rooftop pools was now spending her days folding cheap sweaters and scrubbing fitting rooms at a discount clothing store in a suburban strip mall. She had no car, which meant she had to navigate the unreliable public transit system. I read the investigators' notes detailing how Chelsea had to wake up at 5 in the morning, trudge through the freezing Chicago snow in cheap, worn-out boots, and wait for a bus just to make it to her shift on time. She was coming home exhausted, her feet covered in blisters with barely enough money in her checking account to buy groceries for the week. She was experiencing the exact soul-crushing fatigue I had endured when I was working as a night auditor and a dog walker. The poetic justice of it was staggering. Chelsea was finally living the exact life she had once deemed beneath her. She was learning the true cost of survival stripped of the unearned luxury she had always believed was her divine birthright. She was learning that hard work was not a punchline, but a brutal, relentless necessity. I did not go out of my way to gloat. I did not drive past the discount clothing store to watch her scrub floors. Nor did I send mocking letters to my parents' cramped new apartment. True power does not require petty displays of dominance. True power is absolute silence. I simply let them drown in the consequences of their own malicious greed. Every blister on Chelsea's feet, every freezing night my parents spent huddled in their rundown apartment was a consequence they had meticulously engineered for themselves. My focus remained entirely forward. While my biological family navigated the ruins of their shattered empire, my professional life was exploding into a realm of unprecedented success. The integration of my educational software with the Silicon Valley parent company exceeded every single performance metric. Our adaptive learning algorithms were being deployed into hundreds of underfunded school districts across the country, fundamentally changing the way struggling students engaged with complex mathematics and science curriculums. I was not just building wealth, I was building a legacy of genuine, measurable impact. My development team, the brilliant coders who had stayed by my side in that freezing basement office, were thriving in our new state-of-the-art headquarters. We expanded our operations, hiring dozens of new engineers and educational specialists. I walked through the sleek, sunlit corridors of my tech campus, listening to the energetic hum of collaboration and innovation, and I felt a profound sense of peace. I had protected my team. I had protected my vision. I had built a fortress that my father's stolen money could never penetrate. Donovan contacted me regularly during this period, managing the complex legal untangling of Winston's estate. The federal authorities were thorough. They recovered a significant portion of the stolen funds from the liquidation of Mitchell and Beatrice's assets, transferring the recovered capital directly back into the secure trust that I now completely controlled. But the money felt secondary to the vindication. The true victory was the complete, undeniable transfer of power. My parents had spent 33 years defining my reality. They had dictated my worth, marginalized my efforts, and attempted to write the final chapter of my life as a tragic, penniless failure. But they had fundamentally misunderstood the basic laws of physics. When you apply immense crushing pressure to a piece of coal, it does not always turn to dust. Sometimes it hardens into a diamond that can cut through solid glass. They had applied the pressure. They had forced me into the darkness. But I had used that exact darkness to sharpen my mind and forge an unbreakable resolve. I had learned how to fight in the trenches, how to survive on nothing, and how to outmaneuver opponents who vastly underestimated my intelligence. They built an illusion of wealth. I built a machine of absolute survival. And when the two collided, the illusion shattered exactly as it was destined to. I sat at my expansive mahogany desk looking out the massive windows at the Chicago skyline. The city stretched out before me, a vast network of steel and glass glittering with possibility. The winter snow was melting, giving way to the early promising warmth of spring. For the first time in my entire existence, I was not afraid of the future. I was not looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next crushing insult or the next devastating financial blow. I was entirely secure, anchored by my own competence and the fierce, unyielding protection of the only man in my family who had ever truly seen my worth. The storm had finally passed, and the empire I had built was standing strong. The transition from surviving to thriving was a shock to my system, but I adapted with the exact same relentless energy I had used to keep myself from freezing in that studio apartment. 6 weeks after the federal raid decimated my parents' fake empire, I received the phone call I had been desperately praying for. The chief cardiologist at Chicago General informed me that my grandfather Winston had successfully completed his intense cardiac rehabilitation program. He was officially cleared for discharge. The relief was staggering, but I was absolutely determined that he would not return to an empty, isolated house where he could dwell on the monumental betrayal of his only son. I had already made extensive preparations for his arrival. Using a portion of my acquisition capital, I purchased a sprawling 10-acre estate in the highly exclusive North Shore district. It was a massive stone-built architectural masterpiece surrounded by ancient oak trees and high privacy walls. But the most important feature of the property was the custom luxury wing I had entirely remodeled for Winston. I hired a team of contractors to work around the clock, outfitting the entire ground floor suite with state-of-the-art medical monitoring systems, a private physical therapy center, and a beautiful sunroom that opened directly onto a manicured botanical garden. I also retained a staff of round-the-clock private nurses and a personal chef to ensure his recovery was completely stress-free. When the private medical transport van pulled through the wrought iron gates of the estate, I was waiting on the front steps, with Donovan by my side. Winston stepped out of the vehicle leaning heavily on a custom mahogany cane, but his eyes were bright and alert. He stopped in the middle of the circular driveway, taking in the massive stone columns, the sweeping gardens, and the sheer scale of the property I had acquired entirely through my own hard work. He looked at me, a profound, overwhelming pride radiating from his weathered face. "You really did it, Meredith," Winston said, his voice thick with emotion, as I walked down the steps to carefully embrace him. "You burned the rot to the ground and built a castle in its place." I held on to him tightly, feeling the solid reality of his presence. "I built it for us, Grandpa," I replied, guiding him toward the front doors. "You are never going to be alone again, and you are never going to have to worry about anyone taking advantage of your legacy." We spent that entire weekend sitting in his new sunroom, drinking expensive tea and looking out over the gardens. Winston was sharp, asking detailed questions about the Silicon Valley acquisition and my plans for the software rollout. He was completely unfazed by the total financial destruction I had brought down upon Mitchell, Beatrice, and Chelsea. As far as Winston was concerned, they had orchestrated their own demise the moment they forged his signature and stole from his granddaughter. He officially handed me the keys to his remaining corporate empire that afternoon, signing the final trust documents that locked my parents out for eternity. With Winston safe and completely secure, I turned my absolute focus back to the business. The Silicon Valley integration was moving at a breakneck pace, and I was at the helm of a massive national initiative. We took the adaptive learning algorithms that my team had painstakingly coded in that freezing, moldy basement and deployed them across 400 underfunded public school districts nationwide. The results were nothing short of revolutionary. Within 3 months of the national rollout, our analytics dashboards were lighting up with unprecedented success metrics. Student engagement in advanced sciences skyrocketed. Teachers reported a massive decrease in administrative fatigue, allowing them to actually focus on mentoring students who had previously been left behind by a broken system. I was no longer just the CEO of a small startup. I was a recognized pioneer in the educational technology sector. Major financial publications requested interviews. Industry leaders invited me to keynote their annual conferences. I graced the cover of business magazines not because I bought fake followers with stolen money, but because I had engineered a product that legitimately changed the landscape of public education. Every single time my face appeared on a newsstand or my name was mentioned in a prestigious financial broadcast, I knew Mitchell and Beatrice were watching from their cramped, freezing apartment on the edges of the city. They had to watch the daughter they threw away become a titan of industry. They had to witness my absolute triumph from the agonizing depths of their own ruin. But professional success and extreme wealth were not enough to satisfy the promise I had made to myself. I remembered the exact feeling of walking through the freezing rain because I had to sell my car to make payroll. I remembered the absolute terror of choosing between buying groceries and paying for server hosting fees. I knew there were hundreds of brilliant, desperate innovators out there right now sitting in cheap apartments working 4 jobs and slowly being crushed by a system that only rewarded generational wealth. I was going to change that. I sat down with Donovan and my new corporate legal team to draft the charter for a massive philanthropic organization. I funded it with an initial endowment of $20 million, combining my own capital with a portion of the recovered funds from Winston's estate. I named it the Winston Initiative for Technological Innovation. The foundation had one highly specific, absolutely unwavering mandate. We provided massive, no-strings-attached financial grants to working-class entrepreneurs who lacked access to traditional venture capital. We did not look at country club affiliations. We did not care about social pedigrees or flashy influencer brands. We looked for raw grit, absolute determination, and brilliant ideas. At the grand opening gala for the foundation held in the ballroom of one of Chicago's most prestigious hotels, Winston sat in the front row in his wheelchair, beaming with pride as I took the stage. I looked out at the crowd of investors, tech pioneers, and the first graduating class of grant recipients. This foundation exists because talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. I announced to the captivated room, my voice ringing with absolute certainty. It exists because nobody should have to choose between keeping the heat on and building the future. We are here to ensure that the next generation of builders, thinkers, and creators never have to fight in the dark alone. The applause was deafening. It was not the polite manufactured clapping of my parents' country club friends. It was the genuine roaring approval of people who understood the exact value of what we were building. Winston wiped a tear from his eye, and Donovan raised a glass to me from the back of the room. It was the ultimate unshakable victory. I had taken the worst things my family had done to me and transmuted them into a machine that generated pure, unstoppable good. 6 months later, the dust had completely settled. The foundation was thriving, the software was standard in schools across the country, and my grandfather was enjoying peaceful, quiet days in the estate gardens. I was sitting in my corner office at the West Loop Tech campus, late on a Friday evening. The rest of the building was empty, my development team having left hours ago to start their weekends. The city lights of Chicago were just beginning to flicker on outside my floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a warm, golden glow over my expansive mahogany desk. The silence in the office was comfortable, heavy with the peace of absolute security. My personal cell phone, resting next to my keyboard, suddenly buzzed with an incoming text message. I glanced at the screen. It was an unsaved number, but my phone had automatically filtered it into a blocked folder preview. I opened the message, my expression remaining completely neutral as I read the words displayed on the glowing screen. "Meredith, please. It is your mother. Your father's back is terrible and the heating in this apartment is broken again. We have absolutely nothing left in our accounts. Chelsea cannot help us because she got fired from her retail job this week. I know you hate us, but please, I am begging you. Can you just wire us $200? We just need to buy groceries for the weekend. Please, Meredith, we are starving." I stared at the message. A year ago, reading those words would have sent me into a spiral of guilt and obligation. A year ago, I would have drained my own meager savings to help them, desperately hoping that my sacrifice would finally earn their love and approval. But the woman who would have saved them died in a freezing studio apartment while they were busy buying luxury SUVs with her stolen money. I felt absolutely nothing for the woman on the other end of that phone. No anger, no pity, no residual loyalty. Just a cold clinical detachment. Beatrice was finally experiencing the exact terror she had happily subjected me to for 5 years. She was learning what it felt like to be entirely helpless, freezing and hungry in a world that did not care about her manufactured social status. She wanted me to save her from the consequences of her own malicious actions. She wanted a bailout. I picked up the phone. My thumb hovered over the digital keyboard. I did not type a long emotional paragraph. I did not rehash their crimes or list my grievances. I gave her the exact same advice she and Mitchell had so generously given me when I was fighting for my life. I typed my response with steady, deliberate keystrokes. "Try working 4 jobs. It builds character." I pressed send. I did not wait for a response, the typing bubbles, or the inevitable barrage of desperate apologies. I immediately blocked the number, ensuring that Beatrice, Mitchell, and Chelsea could never reach my personal device again. I permanently severed the final fraying thread that connected me to their miserable existence. I set the phone face down on the polished surface of my mahogany desk. The sharp click of the device hitting the wood echoed with a profound sense of finality in the quiet office. I stood up from my leather chair, walked over to the massive glass windows, and looked out over the Chicago skyline. The city was a sprawling, glittering grid of endless possibilities, completely open and waiting for me. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was no longer the struggling dropout, the invisible sister, or the victim of their financial crimes. I was a titan in my industry, a fierce protector of my grandfather's true legacy, and the absolute master of my own fate. I took a deep, steadying breath of the clean, climate-controlled air, letting the profound silence wash over me. The war was officially over. The battle lines were erased, and I was completely autonomous, wildly successful, and finally absolutely at peace. Looking back at that disastrous birthday dinner and the brutal financial war that followed, the greatest lesson I learned was not about the power of money. It was about the undeniable power of self-reliance. For years, my parents gaslit me into believing that my struggles were the result of my own incompetence, all while they secretly funded their luxury with my stolen inheritance. They weaponized my poverty and isolated me, assuming that my lack of resources meant I had no strength. But toxic families often make a fatal miscalculation. They confuse financial vulnerability with absolute weakness. The hardest truth I had to accept was that the people who were supposed to protect me were the very ones trying to destroy me. I couldn't heal by appealing to their non-existent empathy. I had to heal by outsmarting them. Setting boundaries isn't always about having a tearful conversation. Sometimes it means executing a flawless forensic audit and letting the consequences fall exactly where they belong. I built my multi-million-dollar tech company and secured my grandfather's legacy by finally realizing that I was never the failure they painted me to be. The only failure was their hollow fake empire built on lies. If you are shrinking yourself to survive a toxic family dynamic, I want you to know that your resilience is your greatest asset. Have you ever had to walk away from manipulative relatives and build your own success from scratch? Share your experiences in the comments below. Please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of healing and triumph. Remember, sometimes the ultimate revenge is simply surviving the dark, building your own empire, and letting the truth shine.